Yo, everybody, what's going on? We are live. Let me put you want to join? I'm going to put it in the chat. Copy. Paste. There we go. Okay. So it's going to be an open room today. Expected guests tonight are going to be Pixie and B.S. Lewis. We'll see how that goes. Okay, let's see. We should be live. Just waiting for it to go live. There you go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start the video. We're going to be watching about the church fathers until people enter the room, if people enter the room. If you're on the other side, let me know if there's sound.
Religion. Being the middle child of the three primary Abrahamic siblings, Christianity demonstrates remarkable diversity in sects and rites, with divergences in the faith being as old as the faith itself. These sectarian schisms continued for centuries after Christianity's inception, culminating in great councils of prominent bishops from across the vast Christian world coming together in an attempt to resolve the theological and liturgical disputes that were dividing their religion. These councils are known for shifting the trajectory of Christianity and causing major schisms that have lasted to this day. They also give us a peek into the vibrant philosophy of Christianity during this period, regale us with very amusing anecdotes by famous theologians considered saints by many Christians today, and provide us with insight into the politics of the Roman Empire and beyond from between the 1st to the 7th centuries AD. Welcome to our video on early Christian church councils, where we will explore the stories of the early faith's fiercest rivalries and provide an overview of the ancient gatherings that shaped the world's largest religion in ways that still impact its 2.4 billion worshippers worldwide today. This video is made available for free thanks to our YouTube members and patrons. We fund our free content through our program of exclusive videos made for our members and patrons, who get 2 documentaries per week, not to mention our content and behind-the-scenes info and goodies. We rely on our backers to support our growing team. Was a united body, or that it had an original creed from which these heresies diverged. Christianity had humble roots, beginning as a small community in Jerusalem in the 1st century AD, comprised predominantly of Jewish people, before spreading throughout the Near East in subsequent centuries. Christianity grew out of Jewish communities, which were accustomed to following Jewish law in matters of diet, circumcision, and social conduct. Christianity and Judaism also worshipped the same God, so it was hard to know what had changed in terms of obligations towards God. Thus, as Christianity picked up converts from among the Roman Empire's many Gentile populations, the original Jewish members of the Christian community were faced with a conundrum. Did Jewish law apply to Gentiles who converted to Christianity? Contention over how or if Jewish law should be enforced among Christians continued among certain elements of the Jewish Christian community, resulting in the creation of Judeo-Christian splinter sects, such as the Ebionites, Nazarenes, and Elkosites. This serves to support the point that Christianity has always been a faith interpreted in many different ways by many different peoples, even from its earliest days. Later theological debates would focus on the nature of Christ, and in what ways he is human and in what way he is divine. This may seem trivial to us, but for Christians of the time, it was important for them to understand in order to practice the faith properly, and then achieve salvation, as well as what salvation actually meant for both their bodies and their souls. Throughout the rest of the 1st century CE, an astounding diversity of Christian or Christian-adjacent groups continued to emerge. Some of these groups fell under the umbrella of Gnosticism. These groups often had their own texts and dualist theologies, but they are too diverse to list here. These Gnostic groups existed alongside other divergent Christian sects, like the Marcionites. The Marcionites were followers of the titular theologian Marcion, who claimed that the Jewish God was evil and different from the Christian God.
I think it's interesting that they're calling him Marcion and not Marcion. That's an interesting pronunciation.
Unlike other Christian sects that considered the Old Testament canon, Marcion declared that the Jewish texts were not canonical. Another Christian sect that existed around this time was the Docetists, who believed that Jesus' body was not real but an illusion. During the early Christian period, no standardized canon of Christian texts existed, and Christians had not set up any criteria as to what they considered canon. By the 1st and 2nd century,
I slightly disagree with that take. I don't know what's going on with the line here. I slightly disagree with that take. I would say that most of them had a, let's call it a tangential consensus, or an implied consensus. All the major texts were already set. I think the only thing in question would be later texts such as the Pseudo-Pauline letters and the Book of Revelation.
CE, all of these groups had begun to write down liturgical texts codifying their beliefs, and as such, rival canons of what the Christian Bible was meant to be began to emerge. As Christianity grew in size and reach, these debates grew ever more intense. Consequently, various regional councils emerged, like the one in Carthage in 251 CE, where Cyprian of Carthage, an important regional bishop, set terms for how much penance people who lapsed from the church would do before readmission. This was important because many Christians who were persecuted would temporarily renounce their faith, which, while understandable in the face of persecution, meant that the rest of the church had to see whether and under what circumstances they could return to receive communion. During this period, emperors like Diocletian were persecuting Christians, seeing them as convenient scapegoats. Slowly, and as the persecutions of Diocletian gave way to the Edict of Milan under Constantine the Great, which enabled freedom of worship across the Roman Empire and largely ended Christian persecutions, various regional hubs of vibrant Christian activity arose in cities like Athens, Alexandria, Jerusalem, Rome, Carthage, and Antioch. These hubs of Christianity displayed significant internal and cross-regional diversity in how they interpreted their faith. By this time, the various competing church canons had become more crystallized, but there were still major points of contention among different sects. Before long, these major debates would erupt in the First Ecumenical Council.
I'm Millie, a content creator, coach, and business owner.
Yeah.
If I had to start my business from zero...
I'm Millie. Tell you what, that's a good place for me to... I'll be right back. Why does he keep lowering the volume? All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop lowering the volume. All right, I'll be right back. I'm going to go put some spray, nasal spray. Let me know how the volume is because it's auto adjusting. So if you can't hear me, let me know.
The late spring and early summer of 325 CE, and was traditionally said to have been convoked and mediated by Emperor Constantine I. This marks the beginning of imperial involvement in Christian affairs, which cemented the growth of Christianity and set a precedent that many emperors and kings in Europe followed. There were many things on the agenda, such as when Easter should be celebrated, the ordination of eunuchs, and other small matters. However, the biggest debate, and the one that the council is known for, is the controversy over the views of the Alexandrian-based priest called Arius and his umbrella of followers. Arius was in dispute with the other influential Alexandrian clergymen, such as the famous theologian Athanasius of Alexandria and his followers, over the nature of Christ and his relation to the Father, for which he had been excommunicated from Alexandria and forced to flee to Palestine. Despite his exile, Arius's teachings accumulated a significant following among certain elements of the early Christian community, becoming known as Arianism. Arianism was a school of thought that considered God the Father to pre-exist God the Son, known also as Jesus. Arius's opponents decried these teachings, claiming that if true, it would mean that Christ the Son was a limited being. The Council of Nicaea, which...
I've heard better explanations of Arianism, but I think this one's pretty good. I think it's a good definition.
Was attended by multiple bishops, including both Athanasius and Arius, debated this under imperial auspices. By hosting this conclave, Emperor Constantine was attempting to ensure that Christianity, an up-and-coming religion that emperors could rely on for imperial cohesion and royal legitimation, was relatively united. In the ensuing arguments, the followers of Arianism asserted that Christ, or God the Son, should be referred to as homoousios, meaning someone who had a similar substance to God the Father. This, they felt, was the only way to show the proper distinction between Father and Son, two entities they asserted required theological separation. On the other side, the anti-Arians declared that Christ shouldn't be called homoousios, one who has the same substance as the Father, which they claimed showed that both persons were co-eternal, as opposed to that of the Arians, which they claimed made the Son a creation of the Father. Constantine was not a theologian and did not take a side, instead trying to steer everyone to a consensus. Unfortunately, the Arians and anti-Arians were so polarized.
I'm not sure if this is the hypostatic union argument.
Against one another, that the emperor's attempts to mediate between them were futile. Despite initial moderation amongst many bishops, the Arian and anti-Arian camps poured oil on the flames and increased the chasm. As the debates at Nicaea continued, Athanasius gradually gained the upper hand over Arius, slowly getting his fellow bishops over to his side and managing to form a creed based around him, the early Nicene Creed, a proclamation of the main doctrines of the Christian faith that many Christians recite today. This Nicene Creed was shorter than the Nicene Creed of today, with later councils down the line cementing and refining its composition. After the First Council of Nicaea, Arius was left.
I'm wondering if they talk about the Apostles' Creed as well, or this is their nod to the Apostles' Creed.
Politically isolated, having lost the council's favor. The emergence of the Nicene Creed at the First Council of Nicaea as the glue that held together the majority of the churches of the Christian world was the beginning of modern mainstream Christianity. However, the First Council of Nicaea did not spell the end for.
What do you prefer, Nicaea or Nicaea, Marcion or Marcian?
Arius's political relevance. Not long after its conclusion, the rogue churchman was recalled to regain communion in Constantinople due to the influence of Emperor Constantius II, the son of Constantine the Great, who, like his father before him, attempted to orchestrate a compromise between the Arians and anti-Arians. This went nowhere, as both sides remained bitterly divided on the matter, with Constantius being seen as a semi-Arian heretic in modern mainstream Christianity. Arianism would even spread to Germanic tribes due to Arian missionaries sent by Bishop Eusebius, and remained popular within the borders of the empire for a couple of centuries until the 4th to 5th centuries CE. Indeed, while the traditional narrative is that Christianity was largely united under the Nicene Creed after the First Council of Nicaea, the reality is that the Christian faith remained diverse and unsettled for a long time afterwards.
And that's kind of slightly, I hope you guys got some, that's kind of slightly Bart Ehrman's argument, I think. I think Bart Ehrman hits it a little bit, or puts the wedge a little bit deeper.
However, the eventual victory of the Nicene Creed shows that the First Council of Nicaea was still an important event, for it set the terms for later theological debates that would occur amongst mainstream Christian leaders. Regional divides continued in the church, and many failed councils occurred without gaining much legitimacy, like the one in Serdica, modern-day Sofia, where Constantius II tried and failed to unify the church. The First Council of Constantinople and the Second Ecumenical Council occurred in 381 CE under the auspices of Emperor Theodosius. During this time, new strands of thought emerged, like Apollinarianism, which claimed that Christ had a human body and soul but a divine mind, and Sabellianism, which claimed that the three beings of the Trinity were not distinct.
And what you have here is the heresies, the major heresies here. And you have the major orthodoxy here, which is interesting.
Schools of thought were condemned, as was Arianism once more.
And Arian had, for the most part, taken over all of the Roman kingdoms. Notice they're not really talking about Montanism.
More. There was also a division of which bishoprics were honored. While Rome and Jerusalem retained an honored status due to the former being founded by apostles like Paul and the latter being the birthplace of Jesus, Constantinople also gained an official status as an honored church. As
I'm not sure, but I think they've done some videos on the Patriarchate before.
we can see, various heterodox and orthodox figures went in and out of state favor, and this would continue in the later councils. The regional and philosophical divides in Christianity continued after 381 CE, as is common with any religious tradition. While the early church councils were recorded and codified based on specific standards, other debates emerged. Like earlier theological debates, these ones centered on how much of Christ's nature, will, or body was divine or human. Other debates were on other matters, such as the debate between two significant theologians, Augustine of Hippo, a famous bishop from Carthage, and Pelagius, a British bishop.
In my opening, I gave a shout out that you might be making an appearance. How you doing? I hope you like church history, because that's what I'm doing tonight. I might, because this is going pretty fast, I might actually put on Authentic Observer, just because I really love her stuff. I don't think Leyden Chronicles has anything new this week, so, but yeah.
Bishop on the nature of the original sin. In essence, Augustine and Pelagius contested the role of the sin Adam committed by eating the fruit of knowledge.
I'm doing good. My contract signing for my new job is tomorrow. I quit my part-time yesterday. I told them I could work the week, and at the end of the day, they're like, you know what? You're good. So I had an unofficial day off today, and I got to hang out with my dad and watch Fallout. Good series, by the way. The opening episode seems to leave a lot of contradictions to what's exposed in the last episode. But if you take each episode as it comes, there's nothing bad about it. It's a pretty good show. But if you compare what's set up in the first episode in the pilot to what's revealed in the last episode, it doesn't match up so well. And there's one character that they don't really explain how that character got there. Silo. What is Silo? What's that one? Just to let you know, I had to cancel a lot of stuff when I quit my job. So right now, the only thing I have access to is Prime and Netflix. And I think I still have a subscription to Disney Plus. I really like X-Men 97. If you haven't watched that, Pixie, it's really good, and it's a really good show. Okay, yeah, hop on in. Let's see. Oh, I hit the wrong thing. That's the wrong platform. No, too many screens. There we go. Bam. I'm going to let this play for a little bit, and I'll be right back, people.
In Genesis, and how much it weighs on subsequent human generations. Another point in their debate was the relationship between how much help from God humans received from the aforementioned divine grace, and how much of humanity's good actions were the result of their own free will. Some regional councils continued, like the Council of Carthage in 411 CE. This council centered around the controversy of the Donatists, a group of Christians who were very harsh on people who sinned, and demanded public humiliation for readmission into the church. The Donatists were condemned by Augustine's anti-Donatist faction, with full imperial backing, an example of politicking influencing religious development. The next ecumenical council would occur in 431 CE in the eastern city of Ephesus. Amongst the topics of debate were the aforementioned Pelagian doctrines and more ongoing debates revolving around how Christ's human and divine natures relate to each other. Two major camps had been formed, with one led by Cyril, Bishop of Alexandria, and the other led by Nestorius, the Bishop of Constantinople. Cyril held the same view as today's Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant churches, that Mary should be called Theotokos, or God-bearer, and that the divine and human natures of Christ were fundamentally united. Nestorius held that Mary giving birth to God compromised God's timelessness, and that Mary should be called Christotokos, or Christ-bearer. Thus, he considered Christ's human nature to be distinct from his divine one, with the former being a sort of incarnation of the latter. Because of his views, Nestorius had been accused of heresy by Cyril and excommunicated by Pope Celestine of Rome. The council began in May of 431 CE. A kangaroo court, stacked heavily with bishops favourable to Cyril, ultimately voted.
Did you
Hey,
ever
Pixie.
read? Hey, did you ever read the book Wool?
Wool. No, I don't think I have.
Okay. I think.
Give me a whole setup. Give me a whole setup. Start off with the author. Start off with the
So
setting.
Silo, I want to say is on. I want to say that one's on Prime.
It's on Prime? Okay, perfect.
Yeah. And so there's this community, and they live in this building that's like almost like an underground silo, hence the name, right?
Okay.
And like each level is like responsible for something different.
Mm-hmm.
Like one level grows food, another level's like the medical wing, another level's like the judiciary system, right? Like things like that. And they say that no level is more important than another level. Hold on, my dog is freaking out. Don't close yourself in here if you want out, baby. Anyway, they say that nobody's more important than another person because everybody contributes to the functioning of this society, right?
Okay.
That's not true. Of course there's a hierarchy. There always is, right?
Of course, yeah.
So like there's this death that happens, and there's some it could be a suicide, but there's some hints that it's a homicide, right?
Right, of course. You gotta have a mystery.
Right. Well, all this crazy stuff happens. Also, when like the punishment is to go when you're being like when you have like the ultimate punishment, right? Like the ultimate punishment in this society is they put you in this suit that looks kind of like a spacesuit, and they send you outside.
Okay, I think I've seen a commercial for it. It's a few years old, right? It's not a new one?
I think so, yeah, because they're
Yeah,
fixing to come out with season 2.
Yeah. So I haven't seen it, but I've seen the commercial for it because I've seen that scene. I've seen
And they
what
make
you're
you clean the
describing.
camera.
Yeah.
Or they don't make you, but you will choose to. It's this weird thing. But I know. Anyway, so like there's so many questions, not just what happened to this person, but like even the first time you see somebody go outside, it opens up a lot of questions. A lot of questions about what exactly is going on. And like I don't know, it just gets and then the way it ends,
Okay.
I was like I don't know. The way it ended, I was not expecting that. Let's just say that. I was not expecting that.
And have you read the book as well, or you only watched the series?
I haven't. I know it was based on a book because the person I watched it with kept saying, "This is really familiar. This is really familiar." And then we got to the end and like it like blew their mind. They were like, "Wait, I don't like I had no idea that was coming, but now that I've seen it, like I remember it, right?" And they kept like, "Where do I remember this from?" And they looked it up and they were like, "Oh, it's based on this story I read when I was a kid." And I was like, "Really?" And so yes, it is based on a book called Wool.
Cool. Yeah, so like I didn't just watch. I was it marathon, I guess what the term used to be, Fallout today. And the Fallout video games, the way the Fallout shelters are set up is like that, where it's a confined space and there's different experiments and different levels different levels of authority, and everyone's supposed to be equal, but of course, there's always some kind of conspiracy around there. So yeah, no, I that kind of stuff is deeply interesting. So yeah, I'll definitely watch it.
Oh, I thought it was very well done. Like very well done.
Have you watched X-Men 97 by any chance?
I haven't. I actually don't watch a lot. That's why Silo's the last thing I watched. Right? Like and I know season 2 is coming out. See, I'll tell you all the last things I watched and you can
Okay.
and it'll be obvious how long I haven't really been paying attention to TV. Or well, first of all, I don't have cable. I think I have Netflix and I think I have Crunchyroll and Hulu and Prime, but I don't know because I don't use them all.
Does Crunchyroll still exist? I know that
Uh-huh.
there's some kind of merger thing with some kind of shakeup in the anime studios.
Yeah, they still exist.
Okay.
Yeah. But let's see. I've watched Silo was the last thing I watched, and I know that they're coming out with this season 2.
How long ago
Oh.
did you watch it?
I want to say like more than a year ago.
Okay.
About a year ago, maybe. See, I watched Marvelous Miss Maisel.
Mm. I saw. So the funny thing about that show is that I was trying to look for other platforms for a while, and I noticed that a lot of women were really big on that show, especially on TikTok, and especially on. There's another platform that already disappeared, and people were just hitting on that show all the time. I heard it was
See,
really good.
I didn't think I was gonna like it.
Mm.
People kept trying to, because first of all, I don't like a lot of shows that like, I don't like the typical girly shows. Right? Like I'm not a rom-com. I don't go watch rom-coms. I'm not really into like it's just not my thing. I don't.
Did you
I
watch
d-
Fleabag? That's another show that people paired up with the Marvelous Miss Maisel, even though they're completely different shows, but they're
no,
very female centric.
no. I did watch Shameless though and Trailer Park Boys back in the day.
Oh, which Shameless? Did you watch the UK or the American? I like the UK version better, and I know that's
Both.
sacrilegious
I've
because
seen both.
yeah.
No, it's not. As a matter of fact, I watched okay, hold on. Orange is the New Black.
Mm-hmm.
Wentworth is better.
Really?
Wentworth is way better. I even like their character Red. Red is different. In theirs, Red is actually the main character, and it's nothing like Red in Orange is the New Black. But anyway,
Is it based off the same book from the same author?
I don't know, actually. I have no idea. But that one it's kind of like the same thing. I want to say it was. And the reason I want to say it was is because there's certain characters that are almost interchangeable. For example, there's one called Boomer, and I can't remember if is Boomer in. Hold on. Okay, in Orange is the New Black, who is the? She's kind of the heavier set girl. She's almost childlike in certain instances,
The
but
one who has an affair with the guard, right?
I don't think so. She's like kind of like people use her as the muscle almost. Boo? No, not Boo.
Trying to think. It's been a while since I watched that. I watched it all the way through, including that one. There's a season before the last season where it just went off the rails, and then it came back. And even though the last season was good, because that like off the rail season, it was hard to because they put the characters back in the first in like their original characterization, but they had
Yeah.
taken them so far away from that for that one season that it was like
It was
well,
weird to put him back.
yeah,
I
whiplash,
know, but there are certain characters that are almost interchangeable, I would say. Like Frankie reminds me a lot of the oh, what is her name? Alex, kind of well, maybe kind of like Alex, but more like the girl with the red hair. She's Red's favorite until Red finds out she did drugs again, and then Red disowns her. Anyway, Frankie is almost like spot on for that girl.
I
Like is
think
character wise.
I don't understand why the actress got in trouble. I think last year or the year before. I didn't quite understand the controversy, but it was something about her being too much like her fictional character, and I was just like, "What?" Like I didn't understand what TMZ
Nikki,
was doing. Yeah, Nikki.
yeah, Nikki and Frankie remind me a lot of each other. There's just like things like that.
The one of the shows that I haven't watched, I put it on my to watch list. but I didn't want to watch it because I was like, did they hire an actress that looked like the other actress? And it was Chloe Grace Moretz, but she changed her name. And so the show was advertised under a different actress. And I was like, well, I don't want to watch a copycat actress. Like I have an actress that I like watching. I want to watch her show. I know that sounds like a weird like thing, but I was just like, if you're gonna get someone that looks like her, just get the actual actress, right? Well, now,
I had to get past that, but keep going and I'll explain why in a minute.
well, it's funny because it was Chloe Grace Moretz. So they're now advertising it with her stage name, and apparently, and I don't follow the drama, so I don't understand exactly what happened. But for a while there, she was really mad about her previous career, so she changed her name for a little while.
Interesting.
But she thought she was being, from what I understand, she was like, people were over sexualizing me and they were typecasting me because of who I was as a child, and I got fat. Like she was like flat out. She's like, look, I got fat, and I shouldn't have to get back in shape to be a famous star. So she got back in shape for this movie or for this show, but she didn't advertise under herself. And now I don't know all the little dynamics or all the, I don't know any of that. I just know like the broad overview. And so that's why I didn't watch the show, because I was like, I don't want to watch a lookalike. I want to watch the actress. Anyway, what were you going to say
And then it
on
was
that?
her. I
And then it
got
was her.
past that because, all right, my mom growing up watched a lot of soaps. Now, I have hated every single one of them but one. And there was one I thought was halfway decent. And to this day, I used to watch it religiously until the whole COVID and lockdown and all that, actually. And then I have not seen it since, but my mom still tells me all about it every chance she gets. So, but anyway, when you watch a show like that, you know, my mom's been watching it since before I was born, right? And so you have like a lot of the same characters being developed, a lot of the same families. You have new characters coming in, obviously, right? But like you have a lot of the same. There are people, there's an actor who just retired that I remember being there when I was like 7 or 8, right? And he's just now retiring from the show. On the other hand, you have the same, one of my favorite characters has been played by 5 different people, and I have hated it every time they have switched, but I think only one did like a not so great job in the end, right? Now they all changed it a little bit, they all made it their own, but they all kept the same base, right? And they were obviously typecasting because they all have like a similar look, but they're all very different, and it's obvious they're all very different. And as much as I like all of them, I can tell you who's my favorite and who's not, right? Like I could put them in order, but it's something you get used to, I think, when you watch a show like that.
Well, I used to watch a lot of sci-fi, and what I noticed, especially in the sci-fi world, is that they were all looking for the same like for the same type of actor. So you would have different shows where the lead actor was almost the same like character, and so the characters all looked alike. And it was like this really strange thing. And I remember in the 80s and 90s, it was happening with movies too, is where you would have three-tier movies. You'd have an A tier, a B tier, and a C tier movie. And you'd have actors that look exactly alike playing against each other in different movies. And I was like, that has to be really frustrating. If I'm not mistaken, I think one of the brother teams, one of them was famous because he was always getting the parts that the other actor who they were looking for couldn't get. And so it was like this interesting justification, I can't say the word, where
Juxtaposition, yeah.
juxtaposition, where like you had 2 or 3 actors that looked alike and acted alike. And if you couldn't get the one you wanted, you would get the one that looked the next closest or the next closest.
Yeah. Oh yeah. See, and I think that's why I liked Wentworth. Wentworth did something with their casting that I very much appreciate. And it's something that Americans don't tend to do well. It's obviously not an American show, right? I think it was done in Australia, and I think they did way better than us. And they didn't have to be nearly as crude to do it, actually, and they told a
Well,
better story. But
there was
they
there were
didn't
two.
type based on
Okay.
looks. Here we have this like expectation where they all have to be even the ugly girl is pretty, right? It's like that kind of a thing. And when you look at the cast of Wentworth, some of them are older. Not all of them are very pretty. Frankie's pretty, right? But not only are not all of them pretty, some of them are very like on the opposite side of conventionally attractive, right?
Well, I was
But
gonna
it's
say,
not done in like it's the only when you see that in like Orange is the New Black, it's always like the bad people, right? Like it's not like some main stable character. And I appreciate that their people seemed more real, I guess you'd say.
so I don't know if you ever watched the Borgias, but there were two versions. There was one for Showtime, and there was one for the international audience, and they were competing against each other at one point. And the international version had a much more interesting set of cast. And it's funny because the international version is for a market that doesn't speak English, but it was an English show. So it was competing with our version. And the Showtime version didn't do well and it tanked and got canceled. The international version went on for like 4 or 5 seasons longer than
Yeah,
the American. And that's very unusual. Usually it's the other way around. But I thought the European version was more interesting. Not that it was better. I don't wanna, like, I mean, obviously, we have a lot better actors in America. Like, people from all over the world come to Hollywood to be famous. I get that.
right.
But the acting choices were not choices that American actors would make. The looks of the actors, they weren't as attractive as the actors, so it made it look more real. It didn't have that weird, like, film quality where you're like, "Oh, yeah, of course." You know what I mean? Like, that was taken away, which made the importance of a character who wasn't as attractive or wasn't as aesthetically pleasing be more interesting. Because now you're
Exactly.
more, because 'cause you're like, "Oh, this character could get killed. This could character could," you know what I mean? Because it's like, "Oh, well, yeah."
And we've
You
had it come in waves, right? Like
Yeah.
obviously we had um in the silent film era, right? It was all about like expression. Then when we could talk, we hit that beauty standard, right? We wanted Marilyn Monroe and we wanted, Audrey Hepburn, and we hit that beauty standard. But then we seemed to back away from it. In and I think that that's when our better pieces started coming out, right? Sure, you had the cute guy that came in every now and then, and he was like the heartthrob or whatever. But you had a lot of like really interesting people. Like when I think of things that I see now, it's a lot of like people lining up Barbies and Kens, right? It's really weird. But when I think of things that I saw as a kid, people were very interesting. Richard Kind, very interesting face. I will never forget.
Well,
Um,
that's one of the things about, like, action movies too, is that, like, you
oh,
go
he's he's comedy, but yeah.
but if you watch international action movies, the women have muscle, you know what I mean? And, like, the guys actually look like athletes, not like bodybuilders. And then if
Yeah.
you look at American movies, the women are all super skinny, but twice as strong as the guy, and I'm like, even in a world of disbelief where bullets don't go through doors, that's too far for most people. Most people are like, "Okay, well, I've checked out. There's no the character's never gonna get hurt." And in these foreign action films, like you think of La Femme Nikita, the foreign version, it's so much more intense because the fragility of the actress plays a part in her overcoming the more stronger guy or the more manipulative,
Yeah.
bad person.
I just remember all the interesting looking people. I mean, Chevy Chase was not a looker, and neither was Richard Kind, but love his stuff. And I remember him so distinctly because he had such an interesting face.
Well,
Um,
I mean, think about Ghostbusters if we don't wanna get too heavy into things. The heartthrob of Ghostbusters is, oh, why can't I think of his name right now? Peter Venkman.
Oh yeah, yeah, and not even cute, right?
Yeah, not even
Not
cute,
even
not attractive, but everybody.
no.
I don't know anyone who argues that he isn't the heartthrob, that he isn't the guy that you want to get with, even though he's
Okay,
not a
there's a
looker.
difference between I'm gonna say this, and this is gonna sound weird, but it is totally true, okay? There is a very big difference between somebody being hot and somebody being sexy. Those are not the same thing, not remotely the same thing. Um, for example, let's see, who's somebody that I always thought was cute, like really cute. When I was younger, I thought Jonathan Jackson was cute. Now you have no idea who that is. But let me think if I can think of another one. Oh, he played the guy on acid in SLC Punk. Devin Sawa. I thought Devin
Yeah,
Sawa. Okay,
yeah.
now he would have been on the hot side. He would have been cute, right? But I think somebody like James Spader is sexy. The guy is not cute. He's not cute, not by a long shot, but he is sexy, and there's just something about him.
My wife is Asian, so like her beauty standards are very different than American beauty standards, and she doesn't think of herself as like attractive. And I'm like, honey, on the American side of things, you're well on the top end. And I think it's funny that recently that conflict came onto the international scene with Stellar Blade, where people in the West are arguing that the average looking Asian woman is an impossible place to get. And I'm like, these are not the hottest Asian women. These are people in a country where they don't overeat, where you walk everywhere, and where the beauty standards are different than our beauty standards. So yeah, that's how they look. I've walked around China. That's how people look. They
Yeah, I
they
just
don't
think,
eat.
well, I think, but I think even then, right? Like, for example, Asian stores online, my favorite place to buy pants. Why? Because they fit me. But and I don't have to get them altered. But I cannot buy shirts from there. And that is pretty fucking unattainable for me, no matter how much I exercise. I will say though that I think every woman, well, I think every person in general, but I'm
Mm,
only gonna speak for women because I've never been a man.
fair enough.
but but I think we all have like almost a sense of like deep-seated insecurity, right? Like somebody when I was like in my 20s, my mid 20s, I was at work and a coworker, I was printing something off at the printer and I could, when you like see somebody out of the corner of their eye, of
Mm,
your eye, and they're like staring at you, they're like hardcore, just like fucking all out staring at you. Well, she
yeah.
had been doing that for a while now. And so it started freaking me out. And I kind of looked up at her with, holding this stack of papers. And I looked up at her because I was sending faxes. And I look up at her and I just stare at her back. And she goes, "You're so pretty." And that freaked me out. It freaked me out because A, that was really weird. Why the fuck were you staring at me like that? But B, nothing in my mind had ever put the word pretty and myself in the same sentence before. Like ever. For like I never considered myself attractive. I never thought of myself as attractive. As a matter of fact, I always thought of myself as like terribly awkward and a little bit funny looking. Like, no, I'm serious. I have a like a clear widow's peak. I have a funny, like almost trapezoid nose that doesn't have any like flair, right? Like I was like the awkward kid in my friend group. Like I was very tomboyish and like I remember like even like during school pictures they would be like smile And my sister would come home and she would be so pretty and she'd look like this dainty little princess in her pictures. And my little sister would come home and she looked so cute. Here I am, and I'm trying to smile, trying to have my chin up, trying to look all cute, and I look like a fucking gangster wannabe. I look like I'm looking at the camera like, "What's up, motherfucker?" Like there was nothing cute about that shit, right? And so my only response was, "Ha, must be the ugly duckling syndrome." Right? Because like there's just nothing there that would put me and that word together.
Well, I can't speak on that, but I can say that I think you're a wonderful person, and I love when you're on your show. So I'm going to say that as the compliment. Um, but when I was in China and I went shopping at the mall, so at the time I'm about maybe 10 pounds heavier than I was then. But at the time I had a 4 pack and I was in fairly good shape. I wasn't in my great shape like when I met my wife. We'd been married for a few years, so you get a little bit bigger. I was super obese in China. Like just walking around, I was huge compared to everyone else. And I mean, I'm talking about with biceps and chest muscles. I looked like a monster. And I remember I went into one of their gyms because I told my wife, look, if we're going to be here for an extended amount of time, I got to be able to go to different gyms. I got to be able to work out. And I was hitting their heavy bags and I was shaking their whole setup. Like their whole setup would shake because no one there is huge. So it's not like I was so strong I was shaking the building. It was just like they didn't have the braces set up in a way that you would here in America where you'd weight it down and you'd put like 45 pounds around the weights to make sure they don't shake. So I would shake the whole setup because they're so small. Even their strong people
No,
are tiny.
I get that. They would be small compared even to me. That's what I'm saying. Like, even as short as I am, they're small compared to me. And well, there's reasons for that. For example, but as small as I am, people I'm not even 105 pounds and I'm about 5'1" and a half. So I'm a pretty small person. However, growing up with my siblings, don't get me wrong, my brother is huge. He's 6'2", he's huge. We're not counting him, just the girls, okay? We're just gonna count the girls. I am the shortest, but growing up, they had me believing I was fat because, yeah, you look at me like that, right? Here's why. When I was a size 1, a double zero was too big for my sisters. All right. So they were like toothpicks. And so although I have always been thin, by comparison, I was not. On top of that, I have always been what my mother refers to as solid. Let me explain this. My mom would be like, pick up my big sister. And they would pick my big sister up and they would put her down. And she would be like, okay, now pick her up. And they would pick me up and they would put me down. And my mom would say, who weighs more? And every one of them would point to me. However, that was not true. I weighed less than my big sister. So, so I am what my mother calls solid.
Okay, so I like to talk about every once in a while because remember my channel is technically I guess a Christian channel in tangential ways. I like to talk about when I was a jerk, and that made me think of there's this girl who I was absolutely in love with, and she was pursuing me, but she was fat. And let me explain what I meant by fat, because there is no world in my in my modern mentality, in my modern sensibilities, that she's fat. There's just no world. But at the time, I was like 21 years old. I would say I was 18 to 21. Like, I don't know exactly where. And I had been dating, the people who I'd been dating were between like 100 to 115 pounds. And she was like maybe 125, 130. And she was about my height. So she was like maybe an inch shorter than me. So she wasn't she wasn't like really short, so she wasn't stocky. She was a little thicker than the girls that I dated, but she wasn't unattractive. She was very beautiful, very smart. But when I was weighing my do I want to pursue her, because she had been making obvious entreaties, I guess I'll say. Um, one of the factors against me pursuing her was that I thought she was fat compared to who I had been pursuing. And it makes me think about how shallow and how relative these perspectives are. Because in my age bracket now, someone who weighs 125, 130 is incredibly skinny. Like that's incredibly thin, let alone if you get down to 100 pounds. You know what I mean? So I think it's weird how all of us kind of get this like we start looking for an ideal that's not realistic to standards. Like we start looking at like, oh, I that model or that, you know, that actress or that whatever. And we forget that they're real people. We only see how they look in the photos. And I think that happens now with Instagram and with, you know, whatever the current thing is, you know?
Well, that and they're real people, but they're also depriving themselves of a lot to have that kind of image, right? And what is really attainable for one person is not
Mm.
really attainable for somebody else. And
So
what that
when
looked like changes. For example,
mm,
I am no longer the big one out of us girls, right? Like I am the smaller one, right? But if you took but it's hard to explain. Like even even though I weigh less, if you were to even today, if you were to pick my sister up and you were to pick me up, you would swear I weigh more, even though I weigh less, right? Now, me and my sister could have the exact same diet, and if we had the exact same diet and the exact same exercise regimen, me and my sister, who's almost exactly my height, she would be a toothpick and I would start packing muscle. Especially my rib cage is wider than hers. Now she has longer legs than I do, and I have a longer torso than she does. But by extension, my shoulders are slightly broader, and so is my rib cage. So, like, like we're never gonna have the same results, even if we do the same thing.
well, I also think there's another factor. So like when I met my wife, I had a six pack and I didn't have the arms that I had when I was a teenager, but I had like 18-inch arms. I didn't have the 20-inch arms that I used to have. And I looked great. Um, and so when I lost my job, I quit. But when I quit my job 3 months ago, I was like, oh, I'm going to get back into that kind of shape. I was in that kind of shape 7 years ago. I can do it. I started running every day. I had a workout blog on one of my alternate channels where I was just showing my calisthenics, and I was doing pull-ups and I was getting really, really great. And I lost 15 pounds and I just look like myself. And I don't mean that as an insult. Like I don't think I look terrible, but I don't look like a 35-year-old who works out, 4 hours a day anymore. Even working out in the same intensity, I still look like a 43-year-old. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. Like it was kind of a blow to my ego, but at the same time, it was like a realization, like that takes a level of commitment beyond just diet and exercise. And I'm no longer in that place mentally.
No, I get it. Look, my age is clearly starting to show. I have my red light on. Look at that. I looked a lot younger than my age for a long, long time, but it is finally starting to catch up with me. See? Finally starting to catch up. What
I
color? That
mean,
is green light, but I'm gonna leave it there because it doesn't look green.
but I mean, ostensibly though, you're still, beautiful. You're better looking than like the majority of people in the world. So I don't think it's fair to compare yourself to like the
Oh, no, I'm clearly not. I'm really not. Like, there's so many gorgeous people out there. Like, I might be like I don't know, like, if on a scale of 1 to 10, with
Mhm.
10 being the best, I'm like a 4, 4.5. We're in there somewhere.
Okay, so
Good with that.
uh,
I'm good
uh,
with that. We can move on.
let me upset all the feminists in the world. I'm going to give you a rating, okay?
No.
Okay, I won't do it. I won't do it. I was going to do it, but I won't do it. I won't do it
I'm
because you
like
didn't.
I'm like a I'm comfortable with my 4.5.
You're well above a 4.5, and I would say this that the majority of the world is really ugly, so you don't have to be like
That's
amazingly
not
attractive.
true.
Oh, I've seen the world. The majority of the world, you might have great personalities, but the majority of the world doesn't have our skincare, our health, our workout
Oh,
routines.
you must
You
be
know.
really disappointed in me because I don't have a skincare routine.
Well, Pixie, I think you look great. So don't let anyone ever put you down. You look great.
I, d- I don't. People will ask me, "What's your skincare routine?" I don't have one. Congrats. I'm lucky
I,
if I remember to put moisturizer on twice a week.
so I used to. I'm gonna say date. That's kind of the wrong word. More pursue than date. But I used to date this Muslim girl, and she had little bumps on her skin, like little tiny goosebumps, but they were always there. And she thought that made her look incredibly unattractive. And when I met her, there were like 5 different guys pursuing her, and I'm like, "Are you insane? You're not unattractive." And she's like, "Yeah, but I got this thing." And I'm like, "No one's noticing."
Keratosis. She has
Is it
keratosis.
keratosis? Okay.
Hmm.
And she thought it was terrible looking, but nobody ever noticed, and guys were pursuing her, and I was like, you gotta calm down, like, you're fine. You're doing good." Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and play a little bit more on this unless you wanna talk about some other TV shows. I recommend for you I recommend Fallout, although it's not perfect.
Hmm.
Um, if you didn't watch X-Men, I don't recommend watching the X-Men, but if you watched X-Men as a kid, it's a good watch.
Okay, then I
Um,
I will watch it.
okay. If you watch it as a kid, I'm gonna say this: when you get to episode
X-Men
5,
and Ninja Turtles were my jam.
did you see they're gonna make a live action rated R version of the X-Men? I mean, the X-Men of Ninja
Ninja
Turtles.
Turtles? Are they?
Yeah. hmm
I'll have to watch.
So I don't know if you saw what happened a few years ago. So Eastman and the other guy said they hated. They got to a point where they hated the comics, and then they got the rights back, and then they sold the rights to Image, and so they started writing a run, and then they wrote a book called The Ronin. And the Ronin was this like it was going back to their original style of writing because they had got into kind of like a semi-teenagery, not too adult, not too kid writing. So they went back to their adult writing. Well, that book is gonna get adapted into a live action movie, and it's intense. It's
Nice.
yeah. So yeah. Anyway, yeah, so I'd recommend that one. There was, like, 2 other ones that I watched recently that just blew me away. There's a lot of good stuff on Prime. There's some okay stuff on HBO Max. There wasn't enough good stuff for me to justify keeping it. You know what I mean? Like, when I stopped having income coming in, I was like, I can't justify keeping
I
HBO
don't know.
Max."
See, I haven't found anything as good as I mean, Game of Thrones was good, don't get me wrong.
Mhm.
But Breaking Bad and Westworld were really good.
So okay, so the people behind Westworld are the people behind, Fallout.
Okay, then I will watch it.
So, this is not good. I'm gonna recommend it to people listening. I'm not recommending it to you because it's not good. I'm loving it, but it's not good. I've been watching, so there's a very good one called El Cid. El Cid is a Spanish language, show that's dubbed in English that's on Netflix, and it's about the legend of El Cid. That's the first Spanish, quote unquote, Mexican, if you wanna be crass about it, but the first Spanish hero, and he's a hero of Spain. Um, and then they did I think it's a related studio, did Zorro, and it's in Spain, but the story's taking place in California, and it's the Zorro story, and it's just as cheesy as it's ever been, but it's modernized, and it's great. I'm loving it, and I know it's bad. Like, I'm like, "This is not good dubbing. This is not good acting." They're doing the Spanish overacting thing in the characters, like, even though you got the dub, and I'm like, "This is exactly what I need right now. I
Oh,
need to
that's
watch a."
hilarious.
Yeah,
See,
I
I
need
was
to.
thinking backwards because
Okay,
the first Spanish thing I watched was a horror movie,
okay. What'd you
and
watch?
I think I just read I turned it off and read subtitles because the English dubbing was so bad I couldn't fucking take it. It was called The Devil's Backbone. It was so long
I've heard
ago.
of that one. I've heard of that one. So this one is, so like I said, there's a good story called El Cid, which is actually really high quality. Everything's good about it, and it's kind of like a Game of Thrones, but taking place in early Spain against the
Okay.
with the war against the Moors and the war against the it's not the Visigoths, whoever are the pre-Spaniards, and it's that story. And El Cid is a very important character in Hispanic folklore. But you then get, from this, like I said, from the same, I guess, network or whatever, you get, you get Zorro, and it's no one there is American. So you have Native American characters who are clearly not Native American. You have, the female Zorro who's not, it's not a Catwoman situation where she's like, oh, his love interest. No, she's a badass and she hates that Zorro because she's like, Zorro's supposed to be a Native American symbol. The fox is supposed to be a Native American symbol, and a white guy takes it, and so she's just pissed. Like, there's no cooling her off. There's no getting on her good side. The love interest for Zorro keeps, for the Bruce Wayne character, I forget what his name is, Don Juan or whatever his name is, keeps turning him down. The comedy villain, if you ever watched the old Nick at Night Zorro, the comedy villain is in this story a personally tortured good guy. So he keeps having to do villainous things because the governor of California tells him to. But he himself is a decent guy, and I'm like, it's such a great update, and it's still cheesy, and I'm like, "This would have been awesome 10 years ago or 20 years ago before storytelling got better." So
You mean like
I
back in the Robin Hood and Tights days?
yeah, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, something late '90s, early 2000s, this would have been revolutionary.
See, but
Now it's just
I miss the I haven't the reason I don't go see a lot of movies, except the new Dune, I'm gonna download that. I'm not gonna go see it in the theater because I don't fucking want to, but I will download it.
really good, by
Um,
the way.
yeah, I saw the first one. I'll see the second one, but I just don't want to go to the theater. But but uh, like I haven't seen a lot of because we're doing this weird thing where we're either remaking stuff or we're just doing this like I don't know, it's like somebody took an outline and they were like, ABC, here you go. And we're just throwing shit out. And I miss old movies, but I miss old movies in a different way. I miss Memento and Mystic River and Donnie Darko and
Where they're
even
taking risks.
even the cheesy ones were something that were coming from a different angle. Like what was that cheesy werewolf movie? Ginger Snaps.
Oh, that's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Right? But even then, they were coming at it from a different angle, right?
Did you watch the 3rd sequel that takes place
No.
in the Old West for no reason whatsoever, and it still worked? I've never seen a movie like that do that and work. That's the one movie where I was like, "Okay, it works for these characters, it works."
Yeah. Or The Village. There was The Village, right? Like, I miss those kind of movies, and it seems like that we've like whatever kind of creativity that was is gone now. And it's so funny because I hear people like, "Oh, the butterfly effect." Don't get me wrong, the butterfly effect was good for what it was, but that movie would not exist without Memento, and Memento did it better.
And it's also 15 years old. Like the cutting edge movies that we think of as cutting edge are 15 to 20 years old now. Like
Yeah,
the
but
current, yeah,
Memento's more than that. Memento came
yeah.
out in what, 2001? I was
Well,
uh I was a I was a freshman, a sophomore in high school maybe. Wait, I graduated in 2003. So yeah.
I graduated in 99. So you were a freshman when I graduated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, so for me, like, so I haven't announced this on my channel or anything. I got hired to write a movie, and I got it's not a big deal. It's a local movie in my local area, and it's part of a film festival. Um, and it's me and another writer, so there's two of us. So it's not like it's just gonna be me, but I really miss really great movies, and I don't mean great movies like as in Oscar winners. That's not what I mean by great. I mean movies where like the original Before Midnight, the original, just films where you'd go in and you'd hear great dialogue. I miss that. I miss a great dialogue film, a film where I leave the film and I feel like I made a friend. I feel like I lived a relationship and it was only an hour and a half, but I felt like I lived the whole thing. You know what I mean? Like I was like, "Oh, I was there." I miss that kind of movie. I miss that kind of writing. I don't like, for instance, and I haven't seen, Godzilla Minus One, but you compare, the good Godzilla movie from, like, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, to the current Godzilla versus Kong movie, and yeah, it was fun, it was entertaining, but it wasn't good. Like, when I was complaining about, uh, Miss Marvel, I'm like, "It's just not a good movie." Fallout, I'm gonna use Fallout because it's the most recent example. It has all the DEI stuff, it has all the diversity and inclusion stuff, but it's good. The problem is not the it's not the wokeness, like, we've had that argument before. The wokeness by itself doesn't make a movie bad. It's when you have bad writing, bad editing, and you're hitting story plots, one by one, you're not being original, you're not taking any chances. That's when movies suffer, you know?
See, I can't believe you haven't seen Marvelous Miss Maisel. I know it was a big hit with all the girls, and like I said, for that reason, I thought not my thing, right? Because usually when all the girls love it, I'm the one in the room like, why am I here? Right? Like, I'm not enjoying this. Like, I just listed movies that I particularly enjoy, right? So, and Memento is way up there. I first time I saw Memento, I loved it. And my sister was like, "You're going to have to watch this several times to get what happened." But no, I did not. I got it. I understood what happened the first time I watched it. And I just loved that movie. But anyway, the
Did you
dialogue,
watch?
though, the
Yeah.
dialogue in Marvelous Miss Maisel was fantastic. Fantastic. And I think that's why I liked it.
So I'm gonna watch it now because I do have Prime and I do have Netflix. I'll check it out. The movie, I wish I had a list of the movies that I've seen recently because I saw like two or three good ones, and you know, I, I don't know if you watch anime at all, but I think what Japan is doing with their shows. I'm not saying all of them are good, but I think what they're doing with their writing and with their shows is so much better than what the American, uh, not just cartoons, but I mean live action.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think it's way better. Like the anime is just great.
So there were two animes that really suckered me into watching anime. And these are the two animes. You ready?
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Number one is Naruto. That sounds terrible, I know, but here's the thing. At first, it was background noise because when you first meet Naruto, he's like what? He's like 10, 9, maybe 8, something like that. And it's very childlike because everything is seen through his perspective and his feelings and his emotion, and everything's very childlike, right? I had a little one that was perfect, right? But the thing is, it's like what I appreciated about Naruto is it was the first show where like the cast that I had really seen done in such a detailed way, I guess I'd say, where the cast grew up with the people watching it, right?
Okay.
And as the cast grew up, I think Naruto has a kid now, right? Like he has a kid now, and his kid's dealing with stuff. Um, but like not only did the characters grow up, right? But their understanding of the world around them grew. And sometimes it got more cynical, and sometimes it got a lot darker, and sometimes hope was brought in. But things that they thought they knew would be turned on their head, and sometimes things weren't what they looked like, and the good guy wasn't the good guy, and the bad guy wasn't the bad guy, but they had to keep going, and they had to keep protecting the people around them, and they had to keep trying to make things better, right? And so, but the whole time, everything's getting more complex and arguably darker in the same way things do as you get older. Maybe not on such a grand scale, right? We're not all out there being ninjas or whatever. But the stories behind it, right? The stories it's telling behind it is, if you're paying attention, is a life journey. And I found that really interesting.
Did you watch Beastars at all? Because I thought Beastars was great. I thought Beastars really. I'm looking up my Netflix queue right now.
I
So we
haven't
do a
seen
little
that one. My favorite one, I was so upset. I think they only did like 23, was it 23 episodes?
Okay.
26 episodes, and then they stopped. And I, to this day, I don't understand why they stopped. That was one of my favorites ever. And it was called Claymore.
Claymore. Okay.
I loved that one.
That sounds familiar. So I'm sure I watched it. I just don't remember it right now. Oh, shit. Okay. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. My screen just blanked out. Okay. There we go. I'm back. All right. Okay. So I am going to go ahead and play a little bit of the Church Fathers. You're welcome to stay in and comment. Do you know anything about the Church Fathers before we get into it?
I used to. It's been a while. And honestly, they were slightly less fascinating than the idiots who did things like the anti-Peg Baptist Church. So I might not know as much.
So let me give you the TLDR, and then let me give you a short, accurate one. Okay. So the TLDR is basically the people who wrote the Bible, their students wrote commentaries explaining what was written in the Bible. Now, that is not a perfectly accurate explanation. The slightly longer, but still very short explanation is that when the Bible was first being solidified, you had different interpretations, and people who would later become Orthodox, who Bert Ehrman calls the Proto-Orthodox, they wrote commentaries explaining how to properly, the Orthodox way of understanding.
Nicene Council?
Like the Nicene.
Bishop Irenaeus and them. Oh, they're not early. I think of early as like the Sibylline.
So
and those groups.
So my two favorite, and they're controversial, so they're not considered church fathers because they're controversial, is Origen and Tertullian. So these are anti-Nicene fathers. These are church fathers before the Nicene Creed, but after the last book of the Bible was written. Now, there's some early stuff like that's in Orthodoxy, like let's say not Saint Cyril of Alexandria, but he's the Pope, Saint Clement, Pope Clement. So there's some writings like the Shepherd of Hermas and I don't know why my brain's blanking, but anyway, the Didache. So there's these writings in this group of writings that are completely within Orthodoxy, but they're pre-Nicene Creed, and it's this, or anti-Nicene Creed, meaning beforehand, that are very interesting. And that's where I've been spending most of my time lately in my readings, in my personal readings, in my personal life. because it's pre-dogmatic thinking that later becomes dogmatic, but it's still in the question phase. It's still in the hey, I don't know phase, and I find it deeply interesting, especially when they talk on things like the soul and the relationship of God and how it works.
I don't know. Some of them had some weird arguments. Like there are four main directions of the compass and four main directions of the wind. Therefore, there are only four gospels, and it's these, and all the others suck, and I will be writing scathing dissents of those. Okay, sure, I guess that makes sense. Whatever.
So with John Christensen, there's some interesting stuff, but John Christensen is interesting because he's actually a later church father, but he's included in the early church fathers, and I don't understand why. That's a weird choice to me. But you have people like Tertullian and Origen who are exorcised from these list of writers, and I'm like, you don't have these writings without these first two guys, going at it. If these two guys didn't do it, we wouldn't have apologetics. So it's weird that the founders of this extra biblical material are exercised because of their unorthodox questions, not even because of their unorthodox statements, just because they asked the wrong questions. And I'm like, it just seems unfair to me. So what we're watching right now is kings and generals going through each of the main church fathers that are accepted by orthodoxy. Orthodoxy meaning the Christian faith, not meaning like Orthodox, Greek Orthodox Church. Okay, and then we're going to hit play. And Pixie, anytime you want to talk, just let me know, and then I'll pause it, okay?
Voted to condemn Nestorius. Nestorius's followers responded by making their own counter-council to condemn Cyril. As bile was slung from both sides of the fence, both Cyrillites and Nestorians accused the other of harboring heresies in their doctrines. Even accusations of Arianism were bandied about, despite it having lost much of its appeal in the East by the 5th century CE. The two councils continued separately, making their own canons by July 431 CE.
Pixie, out of curiosity, I had scheduled next another video on the same topic, which was going to be Jimmy Akin. But since we already were talking aesthetics, would you be interested in me, when this one ends, us going to Authentic Observer? Because she's just talking about the feminine understanding of aesthetics. And I thought her conversation was, or her monologue was completely interesting.
Sure, whatever you want to do.
Okay, cool. All right, we'll finish this one and then we'll jump to Authentic Observer.
This caused a major schism between the followers of Nestorius and the rest of the church. Both the followers of Nestorius and Cyril appealed to the emperor. However, the emperor was wary of taking sides, and thus had both Cyril and Nestorius exiled. Cyril eventually returned to Alexandria, while Nestorius went to an Antiochian and later Egyptian monastery to live out the rest of his days. However, these divides continued to cause controversy amongst the empire. Nestorianism, for its part, spread to Iraq, the Sasanian Empire, Central Asia, and even China, with relative success, being present in those regions for the next millennium at the very least.
Hi, I'm JT, and I made Result Hunter, the search engine for conservatives. Let me just tell you what it does. First of all,
As the debates continued,
Pixie, are you going to use that one? Conservative Hunter search results.
Probably not, but that's okay.
So what did you think about there's a lot of conservative, like usually it's like good liberal stuff happening on the news. There was a lot of conservative drama this past week. Did you hear any of that?
I've been talking on mute. No, I have not been paying attention at all.
So the three big ones that I thought were interesting were Candace Owens versus Ben Shapiro, which was she got fired. Nick Fuentes versus Ben Shapiro versus Lauren Chen. Lauren Chen took the side of the white nationalists and took the side of the pro anti-Zionist, and I was like, "What the hell?" And because I didn't think she was going to do that. That was shocking to me. And then I think Trump got hit with the potential jail time. And there was one more big freaking story this week that was on the conservative side. And it was all insane, man. Like I've never seen that much drama back to back on the conservative side of things. Like the whole point of being conservative is to like be conservative. And here they were just going all out like, nah, screw this shit. Let's make a mess. Okay.
And
Go ahead.
no, I will save that because I really don't know what's going on yet, so I'll have to look at it first.
From another philosophy that emerged during this time, called Miaphysitism, which held that Christ has one human-divine merged nature, a sort of human-god hybrid being. Others still, later to be called Chalcedonians, thought both Miaphysitism and Monophysitism were heretical, and that Christ had two inseparable human and divine natures, which were united but did not merge. The Second Council of Ephesus occurred in 449 CE to repudiate Nestorianism further, but many rejected it due to its monophysite tendencies. This resulted in the most seminal council of late antiquity.
You are muted, dear.
Thank you. So let me say that again. So Tertullian is a monophysite, but his monophysitism was coming from here and it has a different angle. So I don't think it's fair to label him as a monophysite, considering that his had a completely different flavor. And he might not even have been part of that cult. But if you think of Origen is also, he's slandered unfairly, in my opinion, because Origen's controversial opinions come after his death, because there are people who took up his name and they started Origenism, which is what Jerome gets slandered with, and Jerome pushes back against Origen and Tertullian, who he was endorsing in his writings as a way to protect himself. And it's through his pushback to protect himself from these later heresies that these two guys end up becoming heretical. And I just don't think that's fair. I think if it's other people who took up their name afterwards, you shouldn't condemn these two guys, just condemn the movements that incorrectly furthered their cause, as it were. All right, keep going.
Antiquity, the Council of Chalcedon, held in October of 451 CE, and attended by two opposing camps, the Chalcedonians and the Monophysites. The two camps began to debate fiercely, as the minutes of Ephesus were recited, to booing and cries of support by opposing bishops. Eventually, Dioscoros and his allies, representing Egypt, were deposed by acclamation, or voting by shouting, a common voting method of all councils. 2 days later, the status of monophysitism was debated formally, and a collection of tomes, as well as proposed expansions of the Council of Nicaea, were proposed condemning the monophysite dogma, all of which were accepted except for a certain tome of Pope Leo, considered to be too Nestorian initially, but then accepted. Emperor Marcian wished to find a consensus, and thus helped the Alexandrian faction regain its debate position, but the decision was to be left to the council itself. Eventually, the council presented a new expansion of the Nicene Creed, with the backing of Rome and Constantinople, which was to be accepted to the dismay of both Syrian and Egyptian bishops. It was actually slightly deviating from the late Cyril's ideas of Christology, as it rebuked some of his anathemas, but it passed and was accepted. The opposing bishops left, and then continued to oppose Chalcedon as heretical, leading to further splits. Eventually, in Egypt, the Miaphysites took hold in the non-Chalcedonian sections of society, becoming the ancestors of the Coptic Church. Armenia, which had its own state and distinct trajectory, also did not accept the council, solidifying centuries of theological divergences among the Christians of the Caucasian mountains. In Syria and Palestine, many monks and priests remained staunch anti-Chalcedonians, forming the Syriac Orthodox Church. Meanwhile, in Ethiopia and Eritrea, centuries of disconnect and a different canon of the deuterocanonical texts led to unique Ethiopian and Eritrean Oriental orthodoxies. The churches of the East continue to exist to this day, having profound impacts on the Middle East's cultural tapestry.
Yeah, I always found it interesting that these heresies here would end up influencing Islam so much, because Islam has its own, or Arabia has its own pagan gods and goddesses, and I would think there'd be more Persian influence into this and Parthian influence into Islam, but there's not. It's a lot of Christian Gnosticism that enters into that tradition. I've always found that very weird.
Despite Chalcedon's eventual theological resolutions, the councils continued to occur until the Islamic Caliphate erupted out of the deserts of Arabia and took over the hubs of Eastern Christianity, cementing the theological separation of the churches of the East due to now being part of separate imperial states. The last ecumenical council both Eastern Orthodox and Catholic Christians accept is the Second Council of Nicaea, where the iconoclast controversy over which imagery should be allowed in churches was solved in favor of the pro-icon faction. 3 centuries later, East and West would break off completely with the infamous Schism of 1054. The early Christian schisms were dramatic, highly philosophical, and highly political affairs. As we have seen, each council could be a whirlwind of drama caused by genuine and sophisticated theological differences. While they may appear bizarre or trivial to us, these councils had real effects on people's lives, based on which side of the divide they fell on. It is also a testament to the incredible and vibrant diversity of Christianity, which has various opinions on matters, like any religion. Different sacred languages of liturgy, different rites.
Okay, so now I'm going to switch over. Now I'm going to switch over to Authentic Observer, and anyone hopping into the room, feel free to comment. And we start off with a Mint Mobile ad.
I think you could argue that there's something.
Pixie, have you ever watched Authentic Observer before?
I have not. She's absolutely adorable, though.
Mm-hmm. She's defending here some art that was taken down from the British Museum. It has gone back up already, but they were saying that, and this actually might fit in perfect, that skinny, short women don't exist, and that it's objectifying women in a way from the male gaze, and therefore this type of art should be banned from the British Museum. And she, being a petite woman, is saying that's bullshit, because this painting has inspired me and other countless women to embrace our sexuality and sensuality, and it has nothing to do with the fact that a man painted it.
On top of that, the older the painting is, the more I would argue it isn't about stereotypical beauty. Because, I mean, we go back to just the 50s alone, and Marilyn Monroe was what, a size 4? That's much bigger than me. I'm not a size 4. That girl had curves I do not have, okay? I don't have those hips. I don't have none of that. We go back further than that. You take me back to the medieval times, and they were leeching people like me, right? I was sickly. I was not good for childbirth. I was not good for marrying, right? So the further back that painting goes, the more I can argue it has nothing to do with stereotypes or unattainable images being pushed on people.
Especially if you go back to the ancient Venuses, they're all what we would now consider morbidly obese women. So the beauty standard has changed so much that in these time periods, wealth and fertility was more depicted as a larger woman, not as a petite woman.
Or not even, maybe not even larger, right? Like even in Greece, right? Where in Rome, where they have, obviously they prized athleticism, right? They had the Olympics, they had things like this. But if you look at the goddess of love, she still has roles, right? She's not obese, but she's also not super thin.
I don't know which Venus it is. I'm not sure if it's a Roman or a Greek Venus, but there's this one great back shot where it's a very smooth back, and then on the very bottom, they give her 3 little fat wrinkles right on the edge, right above her butt. And I was just like,
Yeah.
that's a beautiful touch. That's a great touch.
Yeah. Or anytime if she stands up straight, you know, her stomach from a distance will look smooth, but
Mm.
anytime she's depicted leaning over, she's got the rolls in her stomach, right? Like,
With that, okay, go ahead.
yeah, they were always depicted that way. Like, even on the thinner side, they were still not skinny.
Well, I was mentioning this on Stellar Blade too, where they were saying it's an impossible standard. All the Stellar Blade characters have like a little pooch. They have a little food pooch. They have a little belly pooch in the front, and I'm like, these are not unattainable bodies. Like they have slightly wide hips. They have little pooches. They're not overly masculine, feminine characters. Yeah, the faces are beautiful, but they're not the absolute beauty. One of the characters is actually one of the characters that are being complained about is actually the face of the wife of the guy who created the game, and she's the one who did the designs for the outfits for the game. So it's like I think people were just making a mountain out of a molehill. You know what I mean? Unless you're going
Yeah.
to say feminine beauty standards are also just as toxic as male beauty standards,
No,
and
you
that's
know
a
what?
different argument.
I think it's just the argument has gone too far. I understand the argument when we're talking about like, why does somebody who's gorgeous and has her hair and her makeup done by professionals and has a stylist picking out her clothes, right? Why do we then need to take those images and Photoshop them all to hell and put, face smoothers and make her eyelashes the length that nobody else's can ever be, right? Like, or why do we take somebody like who has double layers of lashes and then make them the spokesperson for mascara as if that's the kind of lashes you're gonna get, right? Like, I think those are unattainable standards, right? I don't think some pretty person just existing is an unattainable thing, and I think people need to get the fuck over it.
I agree. All right, I'm gonna hit play. Anytime you're since I noticed that you're muting, anytime that you want to speak, Pixie, let me know and just unmute like a second beforehand, and then I'll hit pause on it. Okay.
In these paintings that are more about an internal male experience than they are trying to say anything about women. I think to deny that this is part of the male experience is silly. When sirens and fairies luring men to their deaths has always been a thing. That's a mythological representation of the male fear of becoming so ensnared by the beauty or power of a woman that she leads you helplessly to doom and destruction. Like the sailors who are the voices of the beautiful sirens, can't help themselves, and then they steer their ships onto the rocks and they crash to smithereens, and then they drown and end up as skeletons in this pond. So that's your fate, if you're not careful, boys. That's what the painting's trying to tell you. Maybe, possibly. This mythological representation of this woman is heartless and cruel and effortlessly controls you. Now, is that an accurate representation of all women? Don't answer that. No is the answer. I know some of you, I'm watching you. No. Is it an accurate representation, however, of a psychological and emotional experience men sometimes go through? Or a fear they have? Or of how bittersweet it feels to desire someone who seems totally ethereal and out of your reach? Yeah, probably. Probably is accurate representation of that. So I wasn't the only one who came to this conclusion. Manchester Art Gallery, so in there, like when they removed the painting at the time, back in 2018, people could write post-it notes in the place on the wall where the painting used to be and like their thoughts on the removal of the painting. And there were lots of mixed feelings, let me tell you that. So some of those post-it notes are still in the display, but not many of them, only a few. They picked out a few to put them in the exhibit next to it. But I actually found a blog that gathered from the time the most interesting ones. So I'm throughout this, I'm probably just going to read some of them because I think, you know, people, the general public's opinions on moving it. So this guy came to the same conclusion that I did. Art is supposed to reflect the entirety of the human condition. Surely this includes exploring male desire and men's fear of female power, which is what this painting represents. It is a snapshot of male anxiety just at a time when women were starting to win more freedom. It tells a tale from our history, which is exactly what museums are supposed to do. Manchester Gallery should present their art to the public and allow them to judge, not hide it away, which is tantamount to cultural theft. So a guy named Tom said that. Well done, Tom. Well said. But yes, yeah, it's really as much about that as it is a painting of women.
I don't know if women have any idea how
Jordan Peterson. There we go.
paralyzing they are to.
If you see right here, Leyden Chronicles, that's another channel that I recommend highly. I think she's going to also recommend them in this video.
Especially young men. A very large number of my clinical clients, but also young men I've talked to in general, are absolutely terrified of women because they're terrified of being rejected. And the terror exists in precise proportion to the retraction to the woman.
Men have been terrified, paralyzed by women for as long as there have been timelines.
So see, now one could.
And I think that's very true. I remember as a teenager being paralyzed when I wanted to talk to the girl that I liked. The girl that I didn't like, I could talk to, at all. Like I could really talk to a girl like B.S. Lewis and really, really like flirt with her. But a girl that I actually liked, I'd have a really hard time talking to her.
Would interpret this painting solely as an excuse to see naked, beautiful women, but that's a very, very, very shallow interpretation. Like, isn't this sometimes part of the male experience, seeing women like this as a temptress? And is it fair for us to ask to not to be represented in that way? Just like a man asking a woman not to portray men as scary in art. Like, what if that's her experience? And is this not a fairly universal part of the male experience? At some point, coming across a beautiful woman and feeling like, well, like the bloke in the image. Like you're looking at a goddess, totally helpless and at her mercy. Like there's something scary and dangerous and powerless about that. I mean, it seems to be a fear of a lot of the Red Pill guys that I've come across. Or they've already gone through that. Yeah, a man being led to ruin by a beautiful woman, not uncommon. In general, I agree, it's not a good way to look at women. But this painting is about longing and desire and down.
And I have the same fear with my wife. And Pixie, I don't know if you're married, but I always have the same fear that my wife could be leading me down the wrong direction, especially if she's trying to push me to do something I wouldn't normally do. And there is that fear that you're following the wrong person, or you're letting someone else's reasoning override your own. And I think that is something that definitely men are subject to.
I am. And I probably have. I tend to approach things with philosophies that aren't very typical, right? I did so as a parent, and I probably do so as a partner. I think I had some. I don't know how to explain it. It's really weird. First of all, I had a very strange example of what a marriage should look like, right?
Okay.
Growing up. That was, yeah.
What was the strangest thing about that for you?
I think watching the way it affected my siblings, I think it in a lot of ways, and that makes me sound like emotionless, and I'm not. But I think in a lot of ways it affected them in in ways I only understand because I observed it in them. If that makes sense.
Well, so my wife comes from a divorced family in China, and I'm gonna word it carefully because she tells me what I'm allowed and not allowed to say about her on stream. But because of the way that she grew up, and she has a sister, her sister is much more emotionally available. So my wife's more clinical and more mathematical in her thinking, and she blames it partially on the way that she grew up. But her sister, who grew up in the same household but had a slightly different relationship with her parents, is a little bit more warm and a little bit more artsy and a little bit more poetic and
Um,
romantic.
I think that's natural between siblings anyway. Okay, because here's the thing. Aside from, and I'll explain this in a minute, aside from me having more one-on-one time with my dad than any of my other siblings, except for maybe my brother, actually. Aside from that, there is not much difference between the way me and my sisters and my brother grew up, right? We all grew up very, very similar. However, if you put us together, we are nothing alike. There are four of us. You would think you share some similarities, sure, but not one of us even have a remotely similar personality, right? Not even remotely. We are nothing alike. I think the closest, me and my brother are probably closer to each other personality wise. And my two sisters are probably closer to each other personality wise, but none of us are even close to the same, nor did we even none of us had the same interests growing up, the same hobbies, the same anything. Um, we didn't even approach people the same way. For example, I have never met a stranger. Well, that's not true. When I was very little, when I was little, I was shy and I would not talk to anybody. But that was after some trauma. My default before that, when I was really little, was I never met a stranger, right? That was my default. It didn't mean I trusted you. I would talk to you all day long and not trust you as far as I could throw you, right? But I was going to be congenial and we were going to have fun. My little sister would not say a word to you. She would hide behind my mom. And my big sister would stare at you intently. She would just stare at you until she decided whether she was even interested in talking to you or not, right? So, I mean, clear, very distinct, very different personalities, and we're still nothing alike. So I think that's just natural. When I say the way it affected them, I would say I'm a little bit not normal in a lot of ways. And I don't say that in like, "Ooh, I'm so different," but I also don't I used to think of it as a very negative thing, and I've gotten out of the habit of thinking of it as negative, and I've started thinking of it as just is. But for one, I'm a very restless person. I'm very restless by nature, and so being like staying in one place is actually difficult for me, right? Like that's
Okay.
hard for me. The hardest thing I have done is in my entire life is agree to raise my super munchkin around her family because it has stuck me in one place, and not just one place, but one place that I do not like and I do not care for, right? And so that's probably the hardest thing I've done. But as far as like relationship wise, the reason I say I have a weird philosophy is because like if I have a disagreement with my partner, we have a disagreement behind closed doors, right? That's it. When we leave,
Mhm.
I don't take that outside. Nobody else gets to know about it. When we leave, I'm their number one fan, and that is all anybody else needs to know. It's anything I don't try to carry any of that outside. I think it would be I don't know, I would feel like a bad partner if I did. But I think on top of that, I don't try to influence him. Right? I think
Okay.
if he's bringing something to me that he wants to talk about, I try to get a feel for it, right? For where he's leading. And sometimes I have to straight up ask him, do you want me to play devil's advocate? Or do you want me to talk through this with you? Because these are two different skill sets here, right? And I need to know which one you want from me. But I think my job is to be the cheerleader, right? Like it doesn't like, and I guess the part of me, like I grew up really, really poor, right? So I'm not afraid to be without money. I know what that's like. I'm not afraid to be without. Plus, I know that I've had infinitely less than I have right now. And I was okay, right? Like I was more than okay. So all I say is like, my thing is, it's like, it's up to you, and you have to do what makes you smile, right? And that's what I want. So let's move to you smiling more, and I'm happy.
Well, let's look at, though, like, I mean, to keep it on the subject of the video, do you ever worry that when you're giving him advice, or her advice, or whatever their situation is, do you ever worry that you're misleading them, even if it's unintentional? Is that something that you worry about when you're dealing with a partner?
Yes. Not even intentionally, right? Like, or not even misleading. Like, it's am I communicating effectively, right? Because even choosing the wrong words, even giving the wrong impression can do incredibly devastating things.
All right, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and hit play.
And can that not sometimes be represented in art? Does it not say something true about the human experience? I think it does. I'm going to read again from this article. Again, everything will be and then linked down below. So this article goes on to say that it's crass to describe Waterhouse as a kinky old perv. The painter was not a Victorian equivalent of a top-shelf magazine reader, but a sophisticated aesthete, conscious that he was sublimating taboo desires in his pictures. He no doubt inscribed himself as Hylas, as he inscribed himself as the knight beguiled by a winsome maiden in La Belle Dame sans Merci, inspired by John Keats' poem. Erotic though they are, both paintings are tense and mournful. There is an aura of regret about the seductions taking place, as they will lead to dissipation and death. Hylas will pay the ultimate price for indulging lust, the knight for falling in love. Yes. We can point to many, many examples of men causing huge destruction for want of a woman. Henry VIII famously tore apart the Catholic Church and changed English history forever, for one. I'm sure lots of you could think of smaller scale and more modern examples, like a man imploding his family and leaving his wife and children for a mistress. Or a bloke giving away all his savings to an OnlyFans girl when it's really Andrew Tate behind the keyboard. Yeah, you might not like it, but the idea that men aren't and haven't always been motivated by women, and that sometimes that leads to their ruin, is a bit stupid, actually, I think.
When I asked my wife to marry me, I actually brought that up. She asked me why her and not someone else, and I said, well, because my other options are, and for anyone in the audience that has these issues, I'm not putting you down. I'm just saying this was my reasoning when she asked me this question. My other options are drug addicts and people who have given up on life, have dropped out of school, who don't have any higher ambitions. You want me to be more successful, you want me to make more money, you want me to go back to school, you want me to have a good safety net for our future, have a good retirement, you want me to move on with my life, whatever that might mean. So all those things were factors on why I thought my wife was a good choice, because I've had the bad girlfriend. I've had the girlfriend who encourages all my worst inclinations, or encourages all my flights of fancy. And I don't think that's a good thing. At the same time, I don't want to marry a tyrant. I don't want to marry someone who's a shrinking daisy, who's going to say, no, don't take any risk. But I also don't want someone that's going to encourage me to do every impulse, because my impulses aren't always healthy.
Right. You want somebody who will build with you, not a playmate.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And yeah. So that was my pitch to her when I asked her to marry me. That was actually my legitimate pitch.
I was really, really young when I got married.
Hmm.
And I did not say yes the first time, or even the second time. It doesn't matter.
My wife, me and my wife got engaged and unengaged 3 times after I asked her to marry me. We would have not even a fight. She would just ask a question and I would answer it wrong, and she would be like, "Okay, no, we're not getting married." I'm like, "Okay," and then she'd be then a week later she'd be like, "Okay, we are getting married." I'm like, just pick one, just pick one."
It wasn't even like that. My funniest response, honestly, was probably when I was pregnant,
Hmm.
because I think it was something like, "Fuck you, no, I'm pregnant." Like, anyway.
Okay, we'll keep going. We'll keep going.
A little bit, just a little bit. Now, that doesn't absolve them, by the way, of responsibility or put everything on the women, of course. No, and in some cases, the women were unwilling in that drama that was created. In some cases, not. In some cases, they were the instigator. You know, that's humans. We're complicated. And it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. And, you know, yeah, it doesn't absolve them of that responsibility or put everything on the women, of course. But this painting makes no such moral judgments. And not wanting accurate representations of real parts of humanity because they're offensive is just an intentional attempt to warp the truth to fit into how you specifically want the world to be, as far as I'm concerned.
I really like her transitions in her presentation. I wish I could be this tight with my work.
You know, with the whole, like, feminist versus manosphere thing going on,
hmm
the more I think about it, the more I'm like, maybe I don't have any answers, right? Because at first I thought it's the pendulum swinging, right? Like, it's the pendulum swinging. The girls finally got some say, and so now they just want to run away with the fucking torch, right? And the boys are not very happy about it, understandably, because while the girls are running away with the torch, the boys are getting the bad end of this equality bullshit, right? Like, they're
hmm
like, yeah, let's make the girls more equal. In the meantime, the societal pressure of being the provider has not been relieved from men, right? That hasn't
hmm
gone away. The obvious legal favoritism against men has not gone away, right? So
hmm
here we are running with the torches, and the men are like, but what about our side? Why don't you take some of this shit away? That you want some of this shit? Take some of this shit, right? Like, take it. And I get that. I do, right? But at the same time, I listen to her and I'm looking at these paintings and I'm thinking, was it any better when they had all the power? Because if a woman had no way to empower herself except
hmm
through a man, would that not almost make things more treacherous in your dealings with them? I don't know. It's a weird thing. Not that I think that justifies the courts not keeping the fuck up. They need to keep the fuck up, but that's beside the so do girls. But that's beside the point.
So, it's for me as someone who, and this is not controversial for my viewers, but it might be controversial for people who are checking this video out later. I view the Bible as literature first before I look at it as theology. When I look at other ancient history, there are very few female writers, and there are very few female perspectives. And
We
so
don't
it's
actually know that. How many of them wrote under a guy's pen name?
well, Mary Shelley, yeah, but I'm
No,
just
I'm saying how
in
many before that
yeah,
never gave away the secret. How many
I
men
don't know.
took the stories from their wives or their sisters or whatever? We don't know.
Hmm. Well, I mean, we do have stories like something Genji. We have like several Japanese stories that we
But
know are female writers.
but women weren't literate for a long time either.
Mm,
So if they were telling stories, it was probably oral.
true. But as I was saying though, like, so I don't have a good understanding of what life was like for women from a woman's perspective. But I know from reading the men's accounts, it wasn't good. Like every time that you hear a Jewish account on how women were treated, or a Hellenistic account, or a Romanistic account, or a Japanese account, the women are always subjugated. They're always um, put away, and those are the wives. But the mistresses and the courtesans and the prostitutes are given an amazing latitude of freedom, but it's such a high cost to their dignity. So I think it's interesting how the women who run the household are are not given the same amount of freedom as the women who are allowed to play, but the being allowed to play pulls so much away from them. And then you have these extreme cases like the Empress of China, or uh, the Empress of Greece, who they do overcome that hurdle. Um, and even though they're amazing, they always do it with brutality. It seems like the only way, and I think Hillary Clinton has said this before, historically, the only way for women to get up above whatever a man was to become more man than the man, was to be more brutal than the masculine brutality. And I don't know if that is the male perspective trying to ugly up what the female did to gain that power, or if that's an honest reflection of what actually happened in history.
I think there's been one other way, but only once. So, that makes it kind of a. And she still had an army at her disposal, so maybe it's half and half. But I would say,
Would you say Queen Victoria would be an exception, or Queen Elizabeth?
yes, because her image was not to be more brutal, but which again, say half and half, because in some ways she ends up having to be brutal because of it. But her image was not the masculine brutality, it was of piety.
Well, I mean, you look at like Joan of Arc and a few other in
I
Christianity,
still swear she's schizophrenic, but yeah.
but you can see women gathering power through piety. So
Mhm.
being a nun wasn't just an escapism; like it was a way to get a type of Christian power.
Right, but
Um,
aside from the nun who wrote extensively, I can't remember
there's
what
two
her
of
name
them.
was.
There's Juana Cruz, and then
Um,
there's another one. Oh, I can't remember her name right now.
but aside from them though, like I wouldn't say. I mean, sure,
I mean,
I don't know that I would consider that power.
one of them wrote a letter to the Pope at the height of papal power and told him to get the fuck back to Rome, and he listened. So I mean, that's
Well, I
something.
mean, there's that, but I mean, like, even Joan of Arc, right? Even Joan of Arc was like,
Mhm.
sure, you can argue that she's being pious because God spoke to her or whatever, but
Mhm.
God told her to go into battle and kill, and I mean, I don't know.
Well, as a Catholic, I don't have a problem with that. Let me mention one comment in the chat before we hit play again. Ad Astra said that she appreciates being able to own property, have her own bank account, and choose who to marry, and choose a vocation. The own bank account thing has recently been debunked by a few feminists that that's not actually what it was talking about, and that it was only in a few states where that rule was. I don't remember the debunking. I just know that some
No,
feminists.
actually, it was so common, and it's going to depend on whether your state is linked with um, common law or old Spanish law. One has to do with codes, and the other has to do with precedents from previous court cases. The easiest way to tell which state you live in is whether in a divorce you live in a marital property state or you live in an equitable distribution state. That's the easiest way to tell whether your state's laws were influenced by English common law or by Old Spanish codes. Point being,
well, wait, before you move on, because let me ask that question though. So again, I'm going based off one feminist. I listen to a lot of feminist stuff, so I was going off of one feminist debunking of this. Um, which one was the one that was more oppressive? Was it the Spanish laws, or was it the Catholic Spanish laws, or was it the Protestant English laws?
I want to say it's the Protestant English laws, because the
Really?
Spanish relied on codes,
Mhm.
right? So it had to be written and argued from a code. And the English relied on common law, so it was precedents set in court. But then how many of these little circumstances change before you get a different outcome, right?
Mhm.
And so, but I also think it has to do with what you're dealing with, because I would say, and in what aspect? Because while there was a certain amount of set in stone in Spanish code that wasn't so much there in English common law, I would say a lot of things were just treated like, on both sides. A lot of things were just treated as property. They were mostly concerned with property, right? So if they're legislating about you, it's because you're being property, and it doesn't matter if it's a code protecting you or, you know, a court telling you what you can and can't do. It's because you're property, and there's something inherent in that, right? And so while a woman could have a bank account, it had to come about in certain ways. She had to have a male signer on the account, be it her father, her husband, her brother, and if they did not have one, they were considered wards of the state, and the state controlled their money. Women had to fight to keep their money from the government and to keep their inheritances independent, right? When they didn't have a male to oversee their funds for them, right? And this was a widespread problem. Now, the one that was less widespread, but still a bigger problem than people like to admit, is there were some places where the doctors would not even talk to the women about their conditions, right? Like they would talk to the husband, and the husband would make the decision. That wasn't everywhere, right? But no, there were a lot of things women couldn't do. But as I said, I will. I also appreciate the fact that I can have a bank account, and that I can have a job, and that I can earn money, and that I can do all these things. I just think that in appreciating these things, we forgot to relieve some of the things on the male side. And let me explain why this is important. It's not just for men. It But you know, it does affect them, and we can't pretend it doesn't, right? It's not a one-sided thing. Um, and so here's the thing: by placing ourselves in the workforce, we have forced the workforce to pay our men less. And we don't like to think that, but that's true. When there is more competition and you are easily replaced, you are not as valued as an employee. The quickest way to get minimum raise to skyrocket is to get rid of half the workforce, right? But people don't want to look at it that way. And so we've done this thing where we've said, societally speaking, which I think is really gross, right? Is we want to be able to enter the workforce, and we want to be able to make your labor worthless, but we still want you to provide everything, you to pay for the dates, you to do this, you still have to be the provider. And I think that's a very strange thing to do. I want to be independent, but you still have to provide for me. Why shouldn't you both be building something? Isn't that what you fought for, so that you could both build something? or the courts. I don't think the courts have caught up, right? I know families where the woman is the breadwinner and the man is more nurturing and is the stay-at-home dad, right? But if they went to court, they live in a state where if they ever got divorced and went to court, it doesn't matter that the dad's a full-time dad. The court is going to favor the mom because she's the mom. She's a woman, right? And so I think, yeah, I appreciate having choices and I appreciate having a level of freedom. I think that the reason men had to be the providers and had to carry a big burden that women didn't have was because women weren't allowed to and because we couldn't. And so if we want to share in these things, then we have to share in them. We can't take everything and force them to hold on to everything. It doesn't make sense.
So I have a friend of mine who was a stay-at-home father, and he owns property. Um, to put it mildly, they're millionaires. But his wife worked 2 jobs. I'm not going to say in which field, but it's a very productive field. So she was making way more money in her 2 careers than he was making with apartments. Like his apartments was maybe making him only a few thousand every month, while she was through investments and everything else and through her pay making way more. Yet, if they got divorced, and I don't know this because everybody has good times and bad times. He would have had to have either sold his property or divided the profits on his property, even though she was the greater earner of the two. And it was a very tense moment in their relationship when that revelation came out to them, because uh, she didn't want to hurt him, and he didn't want to lose something that he worked his whole life to do, which was own property. But because of the laws, she was seen as the one who needed to be taken care of because she had the daughter and all this other stuff, even though she was the one working and he was the caretaker. So I thought that was a very interesting thing, and that story's a few years old, but I still think it's relevant to this conversation.
Right, and that's what I'm saying, right? Like, I'm not saying that women shouldn't be allowed to do this. And I did phrase it probably poorly when I said we devalue their, employment value. An overinflated job market is going to devalue anybody's job value. The reason I said we and they is because historically they were working and then we entered it. And by entering it, we created more competition that devalued everybody's labor, ours and theirs.
So that's something
Um,
I wanted to ask you about, but you kind of went past it. But since you just brought it back, I'm going to ask you about that
yeah,
now, which
yeah,
is, so let's go back to what I was saying originally, which you slightly objected to, but I think we're both on the same page of it, which is not every state had these terrible laws, but certain states did. Should we be measuring the advancements of rights based on the lowest or the worst not subjective,
yes,
oppressive laws, or should we be basing it
no,
on on on
on the
on the whole?
worst. No, on the
Okay.
worst. Because if you allow it, if you allow, I don't care if it's one state. If you let's go back to slavery. If you
Mhm.
allow one state to have slaves, you're you're okaying it legally. You're allowing that. That is validation under your laws, right? And
Okay.
that's what I measure it by. So it doesn't matter that it's one state. This is something you have legally allowed, and that's the measurement.
So on the conservative side of things, and I'm not trying to get into a deep well here. I'm just using this as an example. On the conservative rights of things, on the conservative side of things, I'm sorry. When it comes to states' rights versus national rights, Trump is seen as a liberal. I know that sounds crazy, but he's seen as a liberal on the conservative side because he wants things to stay on a states' rights basis when it comes to bodily autonomy and those kind of issues. And I'm wording it that way specifically to avoid the longer conversation. do you think that that perspective, given what you just said, where it's the worst example that matters, not the average example, do you think that throwing it over to the states, throwing things over to individual states' rights is either a cop out, or it's not addressing the issue as a whole? Or do you think that individual states should be based on what their equality is versus what the whole?
Look, I think when
And we
you
can make
get
this a
into this
global
one,
question as well.
no, because here's where we're going to disagree fundamentally, right? Because
Mhm.
I think that what abortion care is and what all it entails, most people don't actually understand, right? They hear abortion care and they think of one thing and one thing only, and that's this abortion. But that's not true. As a matter of fact, if a woman naturally miscarries and goes to the hospital, the care that she receives is abortion care, right? And people say, oh, well, they don't want term limits. They want to have unlimited term limits. That's not true, okay? And most of the time, in most cases, I'm not going to say in all, in most cases, late term abortions are because of medical emergencies. And usually when a baby is not viable, right? And so abortion law is here's where it gets fundamentally difficult, right?
Mhm.
Because the goal in protecting human rights should be to minimize suffering and to protect the rights of as many people as you can, right? But looking at what has happened in these people in these states, and I live in one, all right? So looking at what has happened in some of these states that are championing the protection of zygotes or unborn babies or whatever it is you want to call them has caused real harm to women, not just because they want to have an abortion, right? These are women who wanted to have a baby, who set out to have a baby, and who are now being forced to carry a baby slowly dying inside of them to the point where they are getting sepsis and possibly losing their ability to have children in the future because of the type of abortion care restrictions in place now. And so, am I supposed to say, congratulations, you protected the unborn, you're now more righteous than all the other states now that she can't have kids and she could die? On the other hand, do I say to the other states, you've killed 50 babies, congratulations, right? What's the right answer? This is something that is so gray and that needs to be so specific and so sifted through the weeds. And people want to bring it up like it's some generic black or white pro-life, pro-choice, and is this good or bad? And I don't think this topic is one of those. This isn't a slavery topic.
So it's interesting that you brought up slavery. I hope my sound's on. So B.S. Lewis was in the room earlier. I don't know if he's still here. Yesterday, I was not feeling great, but the video that we were watching we were watching was on whether or not slaves wrote the New Testament. And my opinion is that they obviously would have had to. That's who the scribes were. I've had that opinion for a very long time, a lot longer than I've had this channel. And someone's writing about it. And her and Bart Ehrman had a little bit of disagreement on whether or not that was the case because of the apologetical implications. Bart Ehrman doesn't want to give ammunition to the apologist. And it was very interesting. And then toward the end, B.S. Lewis wanted to challenge me on slavery, which, again, I've read. I've read Dr. Bowman's book. Before I read Dr. Bowman's book, I've read a ton of biblical commentary. I know that the Bible has slavery in it. I don't deny any of those things. But I do think that just like the abortion issue, there are approaches that seem to the topic that seem triggering is the wrong way to put it, emotionally loaded on both sides. And I recently did a video. Give me just one more second before you comment.
Wait. Are we going to do this biblical slavery thing where it was a choice and it was paying off a debt and you released them during Jubilee and it had all these rules on how you had to treat them? Because that's only true of people if they were also Jewish. It does not apply to all your neighbors and prisoners of war and captured slaves and women you forcefully took as brides. It didn't count for any of them. I'm just saying.
Well, again, that isn't my stance. I
Okay,
totally
and
and
I will let
wholly
you
admit that there's slavery in the Bible. I just said that. But to me, it's so emotionally loaded that just like what happened right now with me and you, where I was saying something that you agree with, you still reacted to it. I
Yeah,
think
fair.
I think that when you get people, and I'm going to slightly switch the topic just for the example, with the BDSM community being welcomed into the Pride community, where you have Christians and Catholics talking about what is or isn't acceptable to be in a Pride parade when they themselves want the Pride parade banned. So it doesn't, the argument has no nuance to it. You have no latitude. And I do think that when you're talking about the abortion issue or you're talking about slavery or slavery in the Bible, because it's so emotionally loaded, there's no room for the discussion. You get what I'm saying? Like you almost immediately take a side.
Well, but I think I think we've been trained to do that. And I'll explain that in a minute. It's a great tool, and I think both sides use it.
Mhm.
It's a fabulous propaganda tool. It's also the thing we have used historically to destabilize democracies in other countries, and may or may not be being employed against us now, but that's not the point. The easiest way to destabilize anywhere is to over politicize everything. And this is a tool that both sides of our political party use, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so I think they try to make everything a sensationalized slavery type of topic. But here's why I said it's not a slavery type of issue. There is no argument for slavery that protects somebody. There's nothing I can say about slavery that says me owning this person is better for this person. This person being subject to my will instead of their own benefits this person, right?
Mhm.
There's no argument I can make that says that, short of like they're incapacitated, they belong in a mental hospital, or we're putting them in prison, right? Short of that, there's there's no argument I can make of another functioning human that protects that other human or anybody else, right? Like what is it doing? It's not doing anything, right? There's no moral argument, there's no protection in owning somebody. There just isn't. I can't say the same thing for abortion care. Again, the care a woman receives after naturally miscarrying, or when one is slowly losing a non-viable child and getting sepsis because of it, right? These types of care are abortion care. When you limit abortion, you are also limiting this kind of care, right? So does that cause harm? Yes. In this case, does this abortion care not only protect the mother, but allow her to have children in the future rather than losing her ability to have kids forever? Yes. So when I say it's not a slavery issue, I'm saying there is a discussion to be had that's not but my money and free labor.
Okay. I mean, again, I don't have an objection for you, so I don't have anything to say. There are some comments in the chat. If you'd like to respond to them before we hit play, I'm going to go ahead and read them out loud, and then we'll take it from there. Okay. I'm going to go back. So we have one person who's just upset that we're talking about this in general. Then we have Ad Astra. Oh, let's go back to JP. JP says, where can I read about slaves writing in the New Testament? It's actually, I don't have that. I don't have it. I'm going to put that link in the chat for you in a minute. Okay. I'll put the link in the chat. The local governments is easier to keep in check. Leave it up to the states. Allows ability for more localized representation. I agree with that. These are emotional topics. Agreed. Slaves decided to stay for life in the Bible with an earring on the doorframe. It's actually an awl put through the ear. And that's only for one set of Jewish slaves. Other slaves, especially those who are conquered outside of the land of Canaan, are not able to just leave. So that's something to it. Ad Astra, if you can justify sex slavery, you can justify any atrocity against an individual human rights. I think sex slavery is something that's way worse than a lot of other types of slavery. Not that there's any good type of slavery. And that is what me and B.S. Lewis were arguing about yesterday, about the levels of slavery versus manumission, which just means the freeing of slaves. And as we were getting heated, I had a terrible headache and I'm just going to be blunt. I was constipated. I wasn't feeling good. I wasn't up to having that conversation yesterday. So we were supposed to do it tonight. And then JP says, thank you. And I say, you're welcome. Pixie, would you like to respond to any of that before we go back to the video?
Well, why isn't Lewis up here?
I don't know. I invited him a little while ago. He was in our chat and he said that he has work in the morning and he wants to do this while getting drunk.
I also have work in the morning.
I also have a signing, contract signing tomorrow as well. But I can go another 30 minutes or another 20 minutes if you guys are down.
Sounds good.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and hit play. Oops. And we need sound. We need sound.
Annoyed me. So I might get some people saying, well, there's more than one reason why Manchester Art Gallery removed that painting. It's not just because it depicts beautiful half-naked women. Some might say, and some in fact have said, that they depict clearly pubescent women or girls, and I think it was a Guardian article writer who said that it was, quote, unmistakably pedophilic. Unmistakably pedophilic. Unmistakably, see, I'm getting caught on that word unmistakably. That's the word I'm having trouble with. I have several things to say. Firstly, can I see that you could make that argument? Yes, you could make that argument. They look like young women, or you could argue they look like teenage girls. But it's actually not entirely clear. So it would still be an argument. It's not unmistakable. That's the first thing. Secondly, I don't know who needs to hear this. Maybe the writer of the article. You do know that women with small breasts exist, and they're not children. And it's a little bit insulting to imply that they are. I think Manchester Art Gallery will be receiving a very strongly worded letter from the Itty Bitty Titty Committee if they don't watch their step. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, and I think it was that same article, the unmistakably, article. She said that she writes about that she remembers when her breasts looked like that, when her breasts were that small, and that my breasts looked like that of a child or something, and that she was interested in roller skating and doing other things back in the day when her breasts looked like that. That's amazing for you. I'm really happy for you. No, genuinely, that's great. Some women still have small breasts. I'm going to now show, to prove it, I'm going to put on the screen images of famous women who have small breasts. Yep. Oh my goodness, they exist. Wow, and they're not children. Oh my goodness. Wow. And some of them are seen as highly desirable. Yeah. How do I feel about the fact that what that says?
So there was, I hope you guys can hear me. There was a law passed in Australia a while back. And if you watch something Bear, but his wife's handle is Sugar Tits. That's actually her name, and they passed a law where certain models or certain actresses couldn't appear topless because they had small breasts, and um Sugar Tits was just pissed. Like I'd never heard her get on Barring's channel, and she just got on Barring's channel and got on her platform, and this was a few years ago, and she was just pissed at how insulting she thought that was, to women, that there were laws basically calling them infantile because they didn't uh, have breast. I don't know if Pixie, if you want to say anything about this. If not, I'm just going to go on forward.
No, you know what? I understand her ire, but I'm on the opposite side of that, right? Like, I wish I was smaller. Don't know what to tell you. And I made fun of my sister. Well, they made fun of me first, so I made fun of them back. So if somebody made fun of me for not being flat, I would just call them 4.0.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hit play.
Says about smaller chested women, you're not allowed to be desired or be in a painting because you like a child. You're like a child. Get wrecked. Yeah. So that's my first problem. My second problem is I think there would be more weight to that argument if John William Waterhouse had a history of painting lots of paintings of quite overtly sexual, on the border. Are they young or are they not? You know, if there was a history of like, this is the thing, stuff like this, because it is up to interpretation, I think you have to look at the pattern of behavior. And apparently also there was no scandal in his personal life when he was alive. Most of his other paintings I've seen are very clearly adult women, like mature adult women, a lot of them. So I think the fact that, like, if it was a pattern of behavior where he seemed to really glorify or almost like fetishize, I guess, really youthful and looking ever younger women and girls, and you're like, oh, that's a bit, and they were always a little bit lewd or a little bit whatever happens to be, okay, I can see your argument. But it's just kind of not, and I think you need more than that to go to accuse a man of being unmistakably, you know, and yeah, kind of, I mean,
that was a little weird, though. I will say that is weird. The whole unmistakably, and the when my boobs looked like that, I was this age, and you weren't a little, like top heavy compared to the people around you, because even I noticed that I was pretty top heavy compared to the people around me, right? Like you don't see this thing. I don't understand.
So, a very close couple that I am no longer friends with, unfortunately, but I was friends with them throughout my entire college career. I guess I should now say my first college career. She would identify as a pixie, which is ironic here, but she would identify as a pixie, and she was very flat chested and she was very small. But she was also a very sexual person, and she would always, she would defend art like this and stuff like this as reflective of who she was. So this is not actually the first time I've heard this argument. First time I've heard it from a British accent, but I've heard this argument before, and I do think it's very weird how, I'm going to call it modern wokeism, but you can call it modern feminism or anything, how they're defining what is feminine versus what was feminine just 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And some of the actresses and models and body types that we thought of as representing the pinnacle of feminine beauty are now considered offensive in the current zeitgeist. And I know that this is from 2018 when this offense happened here, but I can remember when being beautiful meant, Vanessa Williams, meant, these kind of like beautiful, I can't say another word, but I guess voluptuous women. I don't know what happened or when it became offensive not to match a certain female ideal to the feminine eye.
I don't know. I do know. I wish I had a smaller chest. So maybe she's just a bitter cat lady who needed a reason to be offended. I'm not really sure. I don't know why somebody would write that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, I'm going to hit play. Yep. And I'm going to turn the volume.
You know, and kind of, I mean, I know he's dead, but still go about slandering him, kind of, you know, wrecking his legacy. And not just making the argument for it, like you make the argument for it, but to just be like, yeah, he's a creep and we know that. And I just don't think, I'm just not, again, you can make that argument, but to be so certain of that when his other paintings, I think.
And I don't think it should be creepy in a larger sense. And this goes back to Stellar Blade and a few other video games that have been controversial lately. I don't think it should be controversial that men find women attractive and that men find feminine women attractive. I happen to have a type, but not everybody likes my type. And I don't think it's fair to judge men for liking beautiful women. I think that's fair. And I think it's fair for women to like handsome men. And it's fair for women to either like a skinny guy. I'm not a skinny dude. It hurts when a girl says she likes a skinny tall dude because I'm not a skinny tall dude. But she's allowed to like who she likes. And I don't think passing moral judgment on people for having preferences is the right approach. And I don't think it gets us anywhere.
I think some people really are just that bitter, though. Look, some people are brainwashed, and some people have been taught that they can't be anything other than a victim. And it's surprising how easy that is. You've seen the studies where they've done it in like less than 10 minutes? Like in basic ways. And
Can you give an example of one of those studies?
Sure. So like one of the most basic ways, and they like implement it on deeper levels. Well, you can't implement it too deep because then you're fucking with real people and you don't want to be doing that, right? Like in permanent ways. You want to keep it surface enough that it can be easily undone, but deep enough that you understand the patterns of what's happening on a bigger scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the smaller scale studies that they did was they took children in a class, it's like a normal class, and the teacher handed out a piece of paper, and she was like, it was just like words that they needed to unscramble.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, you know, you have like 2 minutes to get this done. Like, just raise your hand when you're done. And half the room, I mean, their pencils start going down real fast. They start raising their hands real fast. And the other half of the room, and they're kind of like dispersed. It's not clearly half and half, right? It's just coming out to about that, maybe a little less than half of the class is just looking around like what's happening. And they're staring at their papers and they're looking around like feeling really dumb, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they keep doing this and they keep doing this. And I think she did it like 3 rounds. And then she stops everyone. And here's what had happened. In the first round, she gave everybody a similar one, except half the room got an unsolvable word at the end that they could not solve. Now, the second round, she increased that. The same group that had the unsolvable word now only had one solvable word on their whole list. Right? And so the second round went even worse for them. So here comes the third round, and everybody has the same list. But because the first 2 rounds had beat these kids down so bad, They were staring at their third list and they couldn't get it. Now later they got it like it was nothing, you know, when it was put before them. But because of that situation, they couldn't get it. And they were asked, you know, like, what was going through your mind? And they said, well, I sat here and it came so easy. They got it so easy and I couldn't get it, right? And then I thought I was missing something. And then when I couldn't find what I was missing, I thought that I wasn't understanding it. And then I thought I couldn't do it. And then when I thought I couldn't do it, then even I couldn't even get the easy ones, right? And so if you can teach somebody that fast to not trust themselves, to not believe in themselves, to be a victim of circumstance, then how easy is it to do it through messaging and through psychology and things like that?
Well, you know, and I'm not going to go too far into the detail here, but I was in a situation recently within the last few years where I found myself where I was being questioned on everything that I did, and that level of, I'm going to call it micromanagement for lack of another term, or for wanting to avoid another term, did make me question my decisions and did make me say, you know what, enough's enough. So I don't need this. I don't need this kind of stuff. And I think that even if you have a mind that's strong enough and a will that's strong enough to oppose that, at some point you're just defeated. Do you know what I mean? Like
Um,
even if you don't accept those things, you are you are being victimized by the brainwashing.
yeah,
It's
well,
not even
okay,
a situation.
okay, they did a study about conspiracy theories. And I don't mean like plausible conspiracy theories or things. I mean like really outlandish, crazy conspiracy theories. They've done a lot of studies of them. And the psychologist was talking, and it was very fascinating. Um, and she said, I had somebody ask me, you know, they said, but this person who fell down this rabbit hole, right? This person that I've completely lost down this rabbit hole, they are brilliant. They are genius level brilliant. Like, what happened? And here's what the psychologist said. Your ability to be brainwashed and your ability to believe in conspiracy theories, to fall down that rabbit hole, right, are pretty much like kind of run hand in hand. They're pretty similar. And you have people who are very resistant to it, and you have people who are very susceptible to it. And intelligence is not an indicator. And it has to, she said, there's this hypothesis or this theory that it has to do with your prefrontal cortex and how strong your prefrontal cortex is. And she said, but even then, the only thing that stands between the resistant person and the outcome is time, right? Because if you can, your amygdala basically responds to fear, and your frontal lobe, your prefrontal cortex, is what it's your rationality, right? It's you know, and your rationality obviously it calms your amygdala. It speaks to your amygdala, right? It's like, hey, there's, you know, like your amygdala is freaking out. Oh my God, that sound, that must be a predator. And your prefrontal cortex is like, no, idiot, that was the wind, right? Like, calm down. That thing. So if they can find a way to overstimulate your amygdala consistently all the time, your prefrontal cortex won't have time to keep up. And when that happens, that's when they can make you susceptible. I found that interesting.
I think that's a very good point. Just for the room, I'm going to go roughly between 3 to 5 more minutes of video, and then we're going to start closing up. So if anybody wants to hop in or anybody wants to ask questions about anything, you're welcome to do so. But do understand that we are closing up shop in roughly 5 minutes. Oh, and hit play.
most of them very clearly mature women, and not many of them are that sexual. So I think it's unfair. And could those women be, or could the nymphs be pubescent teenage girls? Yeah. Could they also be young women? Yeah, they could be that too. Point is, it's not. You don't know, and to claim to know his intentions when there's no pattern there, I think is just a little bit. I don't like that. And also because, and to me, I didn't think teenagers when I saw that. I thought I saw young women. And also, it makes sense why they look youthful, because they're nymphs. That sort of eternal youth, impish look. But I don't necessarily see child. I heard some people bring the point that there's a couple of nymphs at the corners that look younger, but they're also completely covered up. So yeah, I just think, maybe if you believe that. I personally don't think I do. I personally don't think I do, and I think it's a bit rude to just be like, yeah, that's definitely pedophilia because they've got small boobies. So I don't like that. Thank you, Manchester Art Gallery. And that Guardian writer. All right, humble brag. God, just going, I remember when my breasts were that small. I was a child.
All right, we're going to go about 2 more minutes, then I'm going to start doing all the closing dialogue.
She was adorable. And that's not even a brag. Look, bigger boobs just mean more pain, okay? That's it. That's all it means.
As far as dudes go, I have a little bit more chest than most other guys. And it's a real advantage as someone who likes to work out, but it's a real disadvantage when you're trying to wear a single t-shirt. I always have to wear 2 t-shirts. It's unfair.
Yeah, I can't get away with all those cute, like when she was like, I'm gonna show you pictures of these women with small boobs, and like everybody's wearing these cute little, like, over one shoulder, they're wearing strapless, they've got these like bandage like thing. I can't do that. Okay, I don't get to do that. I don't get to wear outfits without a bra. I don't get to do that. And on top of that, I can't even, because I have a condition where, oh fuck it, I'll just say it. My boobs are extra fibrous, quote unquote, which makes them particularly dense and heavy. So I can't even wear a fucking strapless bra. Right? So it's not a brag. It's a fucking problem. I'm just saying.
I had a friend of mine who we were a couple. There's no way to say it otherwise, but we were also friends, and we were athletes together. And this is as adults. It was like professional athletic related. We would train people how to fight, and it was interesting because when she would wear a loose shirt, she had really big breast, beautiful breast at that, so proportional. But she would always wear a tight sports bra. And one time I just asked her, I said, like, that doesn't bother? And she's like, no, it completely bothers me. But it's either do this or do the other thing, and the other thing's worse. And I'm like, okay. And that's the farthest I ever had that conversation, and we never got into it.
Oh, it hurts. It hurts. Oh my gosh. And you can go too far that way too, because I have to too. Anytime I do anything athletic, I have to, like, I gotta bind that, practically bind it, right? I've also had to bind for a performance, and every fucking breath hurt. I didn't think I was gonna make it, but I did.
Well, I don't know if you watched Blue-Eyed Samurai. That's another one I'd recommend. And in that, she's binding, but she's not binding to be a man, even though people mistake her for a man because she's doing samurai work. But she's binding to be a good fighter because her breasts would just get in the way of the sword work and the arrow work. And it just worked so good for the story. Okay, we are at time. I'm going to let Pixie, if you want to say anything, I'm going to let you have the final word on that, and then I'm going to close out. So anything to
No, I
talk
think
about
I've
tonight?
said plenty of things.
All right. Well, today was a good day. We did have a spike in views for a little while. I know it's gone down right now because I'm about to close out. I want to re-invite B.S. Lewis. You can debate me anytime. Anyone watching this in the future, I am open to debates. I am going to have a new job soon, so I will have to schedule debates again, and I can't just have them at any time. The channel will probably change just a little bit. We'll probably still do Monday through Thursday live streams, but they're now going to be probably at 10:30 or 11 because I'm going to be getting out at 10 o'clock or 8 at night. Anyone who's religious, pray for me that I do well at this new job and that I'm able to support my father through this new endeavor. And that my wife continues to be patient with me as I help my dad out through all these things because it does affect her plans and it does mess with what we want to do with our future. Anyway, that's it for me. I love you all. God bless. Pixie, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate you being on.
Anytime.
Everyone, good night. Pixie, if you want to stay on for 2 seconds after I end the stream, you're welcome to stay on.